strategy, the DWP lacks any clear measures or implementation plan to promote the employment of disabled people. The report found that the number of disabled people out of work has remained stagnant at 3.7 million for the last 5 years, highlighting that the increase in the number of disabled people has not been matched by a decrease in the number of disabled people that are actually out of work. The report also found that the government has yet to evaluate the effectiveness of its employment support programme, and indeed the head of the NAO himself has said that the government has yet to make a significant dent in the number of disabled people out of work, and the disability employment gap has stayed at little above 30% for the past 2 years. Recently, the Secretary of State announced a more ambitious plan to increase its target of employment beyond 1 million in the next 10 years. But given today's conclusions, how does she expect to deliver that? The NAO also found that the caseload of work coaches is set to double as a result of universal credit. So how will the Minister ensure that disabled people do not receive a worse service, and what additional resources will be made available aside from just disability employment leads? We all know the Access to Work scheme is effective and many employers are unaware of it. Will the Minister commit to expanding the scheme and also removing the current cap that is in place? The government's disability confidence scheme lacks any credible performance measures to ensure disabled people are getting the right support and any quality standards and any independent evaluation. So will they now commit to getting the disability confidence scheme independently evaluated? And will they also start to record the number of disabled people that are in work as a result? And finally, Mr Speaker, it has been 2 weeks since there was a Minister for Disabled People. When will one be appointed?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the NAO report did welcome our approach to offer a tailored and personalised support. And we know from speaking to disabled people of all ages that is something that they very much welcome, as all of us in society have our own unique challenges and opportunities as we navigate through life, particularly seeking for work. And I know during my time formerly as the Minister for Disabled People on many visits just how powerful the case for doing everything we can to help disabled people into work, particularly young disabled people who want to have exactly the same opportunities as their peers. The NAO report also welcomed our test and learn approach. There is no global take it off the shelf with a book and say this is exactly how we can help every single individual. We have to develop new innovative ways, and that was welcomed, as was our commitment to continue to do partnership working, particularly supporting local excellent initiatives that help unlock people's potential. And I don't recognise much of what the Shadow Minister says, because there are 930,000 more disabled people in work over the last 5 years. This is real people having that opportunity to work. It is record numbers. Over 400,000 workless disabled people a year move into work. That is a welcome figure. But we recognise more needs to be done, which is why we have said the Secretary of State was very passionate about saying we will review that target of 1 million more by 2027, and I will support that. Mr Speaker, we are focusing our efforts on a personalised and tailored support. We are increasing the number of disability advisors and their training. The personalised support package will unlock local initiatives. The Work and Health Programme helping 220,000 disabled people. Our joined up working with the Department of Health and Social Care, and our proactive work supporting employers, which has helped, and I recognise the point of raising awareness on access to work, and we do need to do more on that. But last year saw a record number of people, up 13%, and the cap has gone from 1.5 times average earnings to 2 times that at about £57,900. And I welcome, Mr Speaker, the cultural change with employers who have recognised it is a win-win situation, just a few small changes. I had that as an employer. I've had that on a number of times when I've engaged with businesses of all sizes. They benefit, as do the disabled people, and we will continue to do all we can.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I strongly welcome what my honourable friend has said, but if I could just give him an example of a constituent, Lacey Rose Samantha, a Harlow resident and who is deaf, was recently offered a role at Broomfield Hospital as a catering assistant. However, in the employment email, it was not made clear that the offer was conditional upon a risk assessment and was subsequently retracted. The offer was retracted. Now, this to me is outrageous. The risk assessment identified a number of risks that Ms Samantha believes could have been easily mitigated against. Can my honourable friend just explain the role that disabled employees can play in the workplace and stop this kind of outrageous discrimination from a person who was deaf, who was offered a job and had that job rescinded?
I thank my honourable friend. First, I'd like to pay tribute to his work in supporting the work that myself and my honourable friend for Blackpool, North and Cleves in bringing in disability apprenticeships. And this is a real terrible case to hear, and he's absolutely right, because the disability employment advisors can help provide that constructive advice to employers, particularly small employers who don't have HR departments, to give them the confidence to make sure all people, regardless of their disability, can contribute to those employers.
Gray.
Mr. Speaker, while I've enjoyed our debates on this subject over the years, the Minister knows that it should not be him at this dispatch box this morning. It should be a new dedicated disability minister that should be there. The fact that the Prime Minister has not even bothered to replace the Minister for Disabled People in nearly 2 weeks is a shameful indictment of a Tory government that has collapsed into crisis and chaos. They are so consumed with their Brexit folly, that they are completely ignoring the day job, and it is costing the country dearly. Just adds insult to injury for the disabled people who have been left unrepresented and impoverished by Tory policies. So we shouldn't really be surprised by this NAO report, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister explain why his party dropped its ambitious policy to halve the disability employment gap at the last election? We see in the NAO report that the government's new watered-down goal of 1 million more disabled people in work cannot be used to measure the success of its efforts. Even the DWP acknowledges that. What is his assessment of the NAO's conclusion that his department has no idea of what works when it comes to disability employment support? Why have all the schemes to support disability employment been underspent? And finally, Mr. Speaker, this NAO report doesn't cover the interaction of disabled people with the benefit system. But can't he see that cutting disability benefit support, as this government has done with ESA and UC, while not having a clue of what the impact its employment programmes have, is the height of irresponsibility and a neglect of the needs of disabled people?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member, I would like to reassure him, I'm very happy to be here answering this question. I'm very passionate about this role. And as I said, my work in this area, both as a former minister and today, is very much guided by meeting particularly young disabled people and their families, and the real passion and determination that they can have the same opportunities that other people have. Now, in some cases, that's full-time work. Some cases, that can be as little as 1 hour a month. But for them, that is life-changing, and this government is committed. In terms of the targets, it's right that the Secretary of State reviews our ambitious target of an extra 1 million. And it's the actual number that counts, because every one of those 930,000 disabled people in the last 5 years have now got that opportunity that so many other people take for granted. And the honourable member talked about the sign-up rates on the various different packages. I would gently remind him they are voluntary. We don't want to be in a position where we are mandating. That said, through the personalised support package, there is the opportunity to look for local initiatives. In all of our constituencies, we've all got examples of best practice. And through this, through the personalised support of the individual work coach, we can actually unlock access to these local initiatives, linking them up to local employers and giving them the very best chance, particularly those who have been a long way from the jobs market for a long period of time. And as I've said, I have seen the joy of individuals working for as little as 1 hour a month, and what a difference it makes to their life.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that you, and I hope the Minister, will regard the report by the All-Party Group on Acquired Brain Injury, Time for Change, as required reading. It sets out how hundreds of thousands of Britons across all our constituencies are affected by head injury, with physiological and psychological effects. Now, neurorehabilitation can help those people to recover and lead purposeful, meaningful, fulfilled lives. But I have to say that requires government departments working together to bring these hidden disabilities into light and to give those people new chances, new lives.
I thank the right honourable member. It's a very, very important issue. I know the former minister met with those stakeholders, as did I formerly. And I know he's been a real champion in raising particularly these hidden disabilities and long-term health conditions. And it's absolutely right, we have the joined-up working, which is why we are working so closely with the Department of Health and Social Care through the Joint Health and Work Unit, because it is a combination of support that many of these claimants will need to be able to unlock their full potential.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The disability employment gap fell steadily in the years up to 2010. It's since then got stuck at a level just above 30%. David Cameron, in the 2015 election campaign, promised to halve it by 2020, a pledge that was quickly abandoned after the 2015 election. What does the Minister now believe will happen to the disability employment gap over the next 5 years?
I thank the honourable member. I know he's one of the most constructive and proactive members of the opposition on pushing in this very, very important area. And when we came to office, disability employment stood at 44.1%. It's now gone to 51.5%. That's up 7.4%, with the gap closing by 3.6 points. And I would expect that trend to continue over the next 5 years.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very pleased to sign up my constituency office to the Disability Confidence Scheme, because I know, as a former employer myself in a small business, that there are practical and awareness barriers. So can the Minister update the House on some of the practical measures that he's implementing to help employers employ disabled people who really want to work?
I'd like to thank the honourable member, first of all, for showing real tangible commitment to supporting this and creating new opportunities for disabled people. The government rightly has to lead on this, but we also need employers to be proactive, offering work experience, interviews and ultimately jobs. And the key message that we give to employers is it will benefit them. We have huge skill gaps in this country, and often with just very small changes they can benefit. And I'm not just preaching as a minister, I am preaching as somebody who ran my own business for 10 years, who benefited from making very small changes to get some excellent new members of staff, and we will continue to work and give as much advice and support to businesses as we can.
We fought very hard on this side to keep the Remploy jobs going. I had a Remploy factory in my constituency, which was a lifeline to so many people. Now, the Minister, I'm sure, has the best intentions, but I've heard these platitudes before.
Yeah.
Can the Minister tell us how many of the Remploy people who lost their jobs are now in work?
Yeah.
Minister.
I will have to write to her to give her the exact figures, but the principle of what we have to look at are these individuals who are more than 2 years away from the jobs market, giving them the real intense support to help them get there. And at the moment, the best route for that is through the specialist employment support. And last year, we had 1,520 starts, which 600 people were able to get at least a placement for 13 weeks, leading to permanent jobs. We need to continue to do everything we can on that personalised tailored support, linking up with local employment opportunities.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Can I say, as a former disabilities minister, I had other roles within the department as well. But it's not just disability, but that was the lead issue. And I would say the front bench, and hopefully the Prime Minister is listening, we should have a minister as soon as possible for this role. I do not understand why that hasn't taken place. However, Disability Confident is a great success, an absolutely great success, and we, as parliamentarians, can push this forward in our own constituencies, just like it's going on in my constituency, Hemel Hempstead, so that people have the confidence to get into work and employers employ the right people.
My honourable friend is absolutely spot on. We can help raise the awareness of Disability Confident. We can do our own Disability Confident events. We can write to employers to encourage them to sign up and to work with the local organisations that support disabled people to find job opportunities. It should be a real priority for all of us.
Coyle.
The NEA makes clear that there's simply no evidence that the 386 million spent on Disability Confident has resulted in a single disabled person getting into work. Would it not be better to devolve that resource and extra responsibilities for employment programmes to local and regional governments, like in Southwark, where we have a Labour council committed to becoming a full employment borough, to allow them to innovate to get more disabled people into work?
Minister.
Well, I think the figures, to be fair, speak for themselves in terms of the 930,000 people in the last 5 years who have gained. However, I do accept the thrust of the point about looking at local solutions and empowering local communities because they know their own job market, where the skills gaps. I accept that principle. We are moving in that direction through the personalised support package, so the actual work coaches can look at the local initiatives. I think there's a lot more work in that area. I very much welcome that question.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents who's disabled has written to me suggesting that this government is putting less into disability benefits than previous governments did, and very concerned that there could be an impact from Brexit. Can my right honourable friend confirm that there is more money going into disability benefits and that this government is continued to help support disabilities, those with disabilities, no matter what happens regarding Brexit?
Our support for people with disability benefits is now at £55 billion, up £10 billion in real terms since 2010. It's a record high. And the amount that we are spending on employment support for those with disabilities is showing a real terms increase following the spending review and will continue to do so.
Barry Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will agree with me, I hope, that this is a bit of a wake-up call, but what the government's been doing is not all bad, and I welcome some of the moves that have. But as Chair of the Autism Commission, can I offer more of a partnership? Because the neurodiverse community and the people on the autism spectrum, you know, they're differently abled. And now we have some wonderful people like Achievability and Inner Genius who are actually going out, looking for people who are a bit quirky in their thinking, think differently. And the gig economy and some of the techie areas is looking for these people. They are very valuable assets and we need to encourage them. Will he meet some of these people that I can introduce them to?
I thank the honourable member who has done a huge amount of work in this area, and these are the sorts of points that were picked up in the Maynard review. And actually, we've worked very closely with a lot of the leading autism charities, and they rewrote the training guidance for our frontline staff and put into the autism toolkit within job centres. And he's absolutely right. If employers are savvy, and they look at their skills gaps and they can match to the huge amount of talent and potential of people with autism, then they will benefit. And that's the key message to employers. We aren't looking for favours. We are looking for a win-win, both for the disabled individual and for the business.
Kirsten Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Remploy in my constituency in Arbroath. They do a fantastic job at transforming lives, getting people with disabilities and supporting them into work. And they had their first placement on a farm in Angus recently. So does the Minister agree with me? We've got fantastically ambitious targets. This government has ambitious targets, and that we should ensure that all industries wish to widen their talent pool.
And I thank my honourable friend for her championing this cause in her constituency, and she highlights the point that a lot of these local organisations are doing a great amount to support the disabled persons, building up their skills, ready to enter into the workplace. We all need to try and unlock as many doors with employers so there are more opportunities that everybody can benefit from.
Not unreasonable. Yeah. Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to speak at the Disability Confident Conference in Nottingham last Friday, and I pay tribute to the work of local DWP staff and to local employers such as Nottingham Trent University, who are sharing their experience of improving the accessibility of their recruitment and retention practices. But when the charity Leonard Cheshire surveyed disabled people in work or previously working, only 23% had received support from Access to Work, and the vast majority had to wait more than 3 months for their application to be approved. What's he doing to ensure that everyone is aware of Access to Work support available and that they can get that support promptly?
First, I'd like to thank the woman for taking the time to pay tribute to the frontline staff in the job centres who do a huge amount of work to support disabled claimants, and that often goes unnoticed, and it does make a real difference to those claimants. Access to Work it was record numbers last year. I welcome the 13% increase, but we will continue to step up our efforts to make businesses, particularly small businesses which make up 40% of employment opportunities, that they are aware that there is both financial support and advice available to unlock the potential of disabled staff.
Alex Burghardt.
Mr. Speaker, building on from that point the Minister's just made, will he congratulate all of those businesses like Brentwood Community Print in my constituency, which entirely off their own bat go out and provide work to people with disabilities and help them often rebuild their lives and find a way forward.
I thank my honourable friend, and I'd be delighted to pay tribute to Brentwood Print. And they have recognised that by being an innovative business in terms of their recruitment, that they can benefit. And I hope that many other businesses will look and learn the lessons that they have set out.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The head of the NAO has said that it is disappointing that the DWP still doesn't understand what works in relation to supporting disabled people into work. But further to the point just made, can I invite the Minister to come and visit the brilliant Escal factory in my constituency? They're a leading manufacturer in tissue, coasters and napkins, and employ supported employment opportunities to those with mental and physical disabilities, and they really are transforming lives.
Well, the NAO does welcome the fact that we are offering personalised and tailored support, that we are using innovative ways and using it under a test and learn. There is no global definition that we can take off the shelf and say this will work for everybody. There is not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody is an individual. Everybody has individual challenges and opportunities. We are rightly investing in that innovative research, and as we find things, we will share best practice, we will roll it out, and we welcome the fact that there are now over 930,000 more disabled people working in the last 5 years, and I'm really thrilled to hear of the success of her local initiative, and I will certainly suggest it to the department as a potential future visit.
John Lamont.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was delighted to attend a Disability Confident event in one of my local job centres in Galashiels, and the staff there do a tremendous amount of work to get disabled people back into work. But can the Minister confirm that the financial support that disabled people are currently getting is more generous than the previous system that we inherited?
I thank my friend again, another champion in his local constituency, making sure that his disabled residents have the maximum opportunity that so many of us will take for granted. And on disability benefits, that we are spending £10 billion more in real terms than we were in 2010, and that is making a difference to some of the most vulnerable people in society.
Chris Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see the Minister survived his grilling from the Select Committee yesterday, but has he seen the think tank Demos's report, which concludes there's a chronic lack of trust between disabled people and the Department of Work and Pensions, finding that 60% of disabled people do not believe that the Department understands their concerns. So can he tell us what he's going to do to address that perception?
I thank the honourable member, and it's always a pleasure to appear before the Select Committee, particularly his very challenging and probing questions. And what I do recognise is that as a department we are incredibly passionate at working closely with stakeholder groups with their real frontline experience, not just to listen to them but to allow them to help shape the development of policies, our training guidance, and do everything we can to unlock all people's potential.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important we get disabled people into work, but of course equally important that work pays for them. And does my own friend agree in that regard that it's important that we look not just at the benefit system, but how it interacts with general measures like the higher income tax threshold, which actually support better take-home pay for all?
I thank my honourable friend, and I think all members would welcome the thrust of the point that has been made. And it gives me opportunity to emphasise the benefit of under universal credit for people with fluctuating health conditions, that they don't simply keep crashing out of the benefit support and having to re-go through health assessments, reapply at a point where their health should be their primary concern. Universal credit offers that flexibility and tailored support.
Ian C. Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Work and Pensions is the biggest spending government department, but its spending is opaque. I have put questions down about to whom money is paid in my constituency, and I can't get a straight answer. We've got excellent local businesses like Empower who are helping disabled people, and I want to work with local providers and the Department of Work and Pensions to provide placements, but I can't get through. Will the Minister help?
Good question. I think it's a really good question, and through the principles of the personalised support package, we've got to find ways to support those local initiatives, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and a lot of that support will match the local market. It's a really important point, and I'll make sure that he has a meeting with the appropriate minister.
That's what I thought. Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a disability confident event I hosted some time ago, we saw some great examples of really talented people being employed by local employers. What work is the department doing to ensure those employers are recognised for actually not just the fact that they've done something good, but they've also taken on some really brilliant people?
I thank my honourable friend who I know has worked tirelessly in the area, and this is exactly the reason why the Secretary of State has been so passionate about saying our target has to be ambitious. We owe it to every single one of those individuals looking for work, whether that is full-time work, whether it is the occasional bit of work. It makes a huge amount of difference, and we are incredibly proud that 930,000 more disabled people are now in work in the last 5 years, a record high.
Derek Twigg.
Speaker, the report says that people with mental health conditions and learning disabilities fare worse than the rest. Can I ask the Minister this, is that a number of parents in my constituency who have young people who are coming out of education with learning disabilities find it really, really difficult and are in despair at the fact that children are going to not find work. What more can the government do to ensure that efforts is particularly focused on those young people with learning disabilities getting back into work, getting into work?
Thank you. And it's really, really important because those with learning disabilities have about a 6% expectancy to find work. And very early on in my time as a disability minister, I met some young adults with a learning disability who desperately wanted that chance. And that's what drove me to set up the Maynard Review with my honourable friend for Blackpool North and Cleves, so we could unlock the potential of the apprenticeship programme. I'm delighted that last year that came live, and now people with learning disabilities who wouldn't necessarily have got the grade C in maths and English are now benefiting from apprenticeships, giving them a real, tangible chance of getting the work that they so desperately want.
Could I commend my honourable friend the Minister for his commitment and dedication to the role, and particularly commend the speed of response to correspondence, which is an outstanding example which other ministers should be encouraged to follow. How many disabled people are employed within the Department for Work and Pensions?
I thank my honourable friends, and I do understand the importance, but not just in responding to individual MPs' correspondence, but offering an opportunity to meet, particularly with the more complex cases. And there are many faces I can see that I've met in recent weeks on a variety of issues. We are all, first and foremost, constituency MPs who are there to champion those in our communities who have got challenges. In terms of how many do we support at the Department, I will have to write, because I would not wish to give somebody of such experience anything other than the exact answer.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just following up from the question that my honourable friend, the member for Halton, asked about young people with learning disabilities and their ability to access the job market and to get employment. Can the Minister just explain then why this report from the National Audit Office actually didn't recognise what the Minister's just said from the dispatch box, that the review that's been carried out hasn't had the effect that he's just claimed it has?
So, well, to be fair, because that's looking historically, and this came in last year, so it's the first wave of people starting to look. But it's all combined with making sure employers have that confidence that they can take on people who may have some challenges. Often it only means small changes, but we are incredibly proud that we will leave no stone unturned. So not just 930,000 people that we've seen over the last 5 years, and more people of all disabilities will have an opportunity to work.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much. This disappointing report today surely underlines the need for a Minister for Disabilities. So, following up on what other honourable members have said, and the reports in today's paper that there will not be a Minister until after Brexit, when is the government going to reassure the public that they are actually acting on this and care about disabilities?
I can reassure the honourable member nobody cares more than our department, led by a Secretary of State who's very passionate in that area, and I have been very happy to support the various parliamentary debates and meetings that have gone on since then. And if we would like to see Brexit be wrapped up, I would urge all colleagues on all sides of the House to support the Prime Minister's deal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Angus mentioned the great opportunity of the Remploy factory in her constituency, but unfortunately in my constituency in Springburn, that opportunity was stripped from my constituents when the Remploy factory was closed in 2013, putting 50 disabled workers out of work. Indeed, one of those workers was found dead on the day the factory was closed. It was another callous and shameful episode of that coalition government. So would the Minister commit to extending the protected places scheme for disabled workers, particularly at the Blindcraft in my constituency, where 250 workers producing world-class furnishings and high-quality joinery. It's a world-class example of how this can actually work as a proper sustainable model. I would encourage the Minister to go and look at that particular example and actually look to extend the Protected Places Scheme and broaden that opportunity for disabled workers in a wonderful factory.
And I thank the honourable member for highlighting what is clearly a very successful local initiative. And that comes back to some of my earlier answers, that we are committed to finding ways that we can get support to those innovative local initiatives that are making a real difference on the front line. And I will feed in the suggestion as a visit to the department.
Let's keep it up, please. Ian Austin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask whether the Minister will organise a meeting with me and his colleagues from the Department for Transport, because the Ring and Ride service, which is used by thousands of disabled people and pensioners in the Black Country, has been put at risk after its operator collapsed into administration. And this is a lifeline for many disabled people who use the service to get to projects, to boost their skills and confidence, or for pensioners who use it to meet friends, do their shopping, get to social events, or projects which prevent loneliness and isolation. So it's really important, Mr. Speaker, that this project is saved.
I thank the honourable member for highlighting the importance of that, and I will certainly make sure an appropriate minister does meet with him to see what support can be offered.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, the Tory Vice Chairman, the honourable member for Braintree, is reported, as has been said, as saying there will be no Minister for the Disabled appointed until the Brexit chaos has passed. Can you tell us why that is? Now, 3 members so far have asked this question to no avail. And it's disturbing that the Minister seems to be blaming MPs for the lack of a Disabilities Minister because it has not supported the Prime Minister's doomed deal. What signal does the Minister think this sends to disabled people about the Government's priorities? And why are disabled people paying the price for this Government's Brexit chaos?
As my earlier answers, I am very happy to attend and support debates and meetings. I was very proud to have served as the Minister for Disabled People a few years back, and my passion has not diminished one bit. We all collectively owe it to do everything we can for those people who need that extra bit of support, and I'm proud to do that.
First of all, thank the Minister for his honest endeavours on behalf of disabled people. It's much appreciated. Can the Minister outline if there are any grants for SMEs to make accessibility issues easier? And if not, would the Minister consider such a scheme?
I thank my honourable member, who is a passionate advocate in a number of debates over the years that I've responded to in this area. Is a real credit to his constituency. And through the access to work, through the personalised support package, there are opportunities to help unlock opportunities within small employers. Really, really important area of work, and I'm glad he's taken the time to highlight that.
Speaker, Citizens Advice identified that some disabled people could be worse off under universal credit by as much as £300 a month because the work allowance isn't available to disabled people who are assessed as fit for work unless they have children. So will this damning report finally make the government address this huge shortfall?
Well, the honourable member, what is clear under universal credit, over 1 million disabled families will be on average over £100 a month better off. And on universal credit, for the first time, people with disabilities and long-term health conditions, particularly those with fluctuating conditions, will remain in support, not crashing out of the system and then having to re-navigate a new health assessment, new applying back for forms. This is something that is incredibly important and repeatedly highlighted by stakeholders with real, genuine experience of what goes on.
Thank you. Order. Statement. The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Secretary Amber Rudd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to make a statement on the poverty statistics published today. These statistics cover a range of poverty indicators. In a year where inflation was relatively high, average incomes were flat, but still remain at a record high. These numbers show that between 2016-17 and 17-18, relative poverty after housing costs has decreased by 1 percentage point. Absolute poverty after housing costs is unchanged in percentage terms, and absolute poverty and relative poverty before housing costs have increased by 1%. Mr. Speaker, since entering government in 2010, income inequality has fallen, and we have lifted a total of 400,000 people out of absolute poverty. But of course, no one in government wants to see poverty rise. After all, Mr. Speaker, we all came into politics to help people plot a path to a better life. This has driven me since I entered this place in 2010 in the midst of a national economic crisis, because I know it is vital that government supports its citizens and provides them with the opportunities they need to succeed. And I sit in a department that has huge power to do this. I have seen what a force for good universal credit can be and will continue to be when we roll it out further. And I know how committed my job centre colleagues up and down the country are, having had the privilege to visit so many of them over recent months. They truly do change lives for the better, no matter what the party opposite sometimes say. Mr. Speaker, colleagues in this House are rightly proud that this government has cleared up Labour's economic mess and helped over 3.5 million people into work since 2010. Because behind every employment statistic is a personal family whose mental health, well-being and life chances are improved by being in the workplace and having the security of a regular pay packet. It means that 665,000 fewer children will grow up in workless households, providing them with the support of an income, meaning they are less likely to grow up in poverty and giving them a role model in work. It means that there are now approaching 1 million more disabled people in work than in 2013, and I want to be more ambitious to ensure even more disabled people are in work. And it means that millions more receive a much-earned pay increase, with wages now growing at the fastest rate in a decade. This is the record of a Conservative government that provides opportunities for all rather than trapping people on welfare. Because, remember, every Labour government left office with unemployment higher than it inherited. Under the last Labour government, 1.4 million spent most of the previous decade trapped on out-of-work benefits, meaning that spending spiralled out of control, with benefits increasing by 65% in real terms. Mr. Speaker, trapping people on benefits who can work does not help them, it holds them back. Every household paid an extra £3,000 a year to cover this splurge, and this included the lowest earners who were paying income tax. It was vital in these circumstances that the government brought spending under control. Mr. Speaker, colleagues know that our careful management of the economy means that we continue to improve our support for the poorest and the lowest paid. Today's statistics capture household incomes up to April 2018. Since then, we have had nearly a year of real wage growth. And this government has made significant changes to increase the incomes of the poorest since then, injecting an extra £1.7 billion per annum into universal credit in the 2018 budget alone. Next month, these changes take effect. We will also give the country's lowest earners a pay rise, introducing the highest ever minimum wage. From April, we will be increasing work allowances by £1,000 for families with children and disabled people, enabling 2.4 million households to keep more of what they earn. Increasing the national living wage, which will rise to £8.21 an hour from next week, and increasing the personal allowance to £12,500, taking more of the lowest paid out of income tax altogether. But I know we can do more, and I want to do that. Since coming into the post, I have been determined to deliver a compassionate welfare system that supports the most vulnerable. In January, I announced that we will no longer be extending the two-child policy to apply to children born before 2017. We would trail supporting upfront childcare costs with the Flexible Support Fund, allowing parents to start work before paying childcare through universal credit. We committed to building an online system to provide private landlords to request that a universal credit's tenant's rent is paid directly to them, supporting the most vulnerable to help them manage their money. And we're looking at how we can ensure it's the main carer in a household, usually a woman, who receives the UC payment. And this month, I further pledge to scrap PIP reassessments for 287,000 disabled pensioners, to introduce a personalised and streamlined assessment service to improve the experience of people claiming health-related benefits, to pilot a single assessment for UC and PIP, and consider how we can best reduce the number of claimants who appeal decisions on PIP and WCA by ensuring we do more to make the right decision first time round. In addition, the Chancellor has already announced our aspiration to end low pay, starting with a new review into the future of the national living wage. Mr Speaker, I will continue to work with colleagues across the House to further improve our support for those on the lowest incomes, because I know that no one in Britain should have their future determined by the circumstances that they are born into. Every single boy and girl born into this country should be able to reach their maximum potential, escape any societal constraints, dream big and reach the highest heights. Every single man and woman should be able to go into the workplace knowing that their better future awaits them and their family, that endless possibilities and ambitions are within their grasp. Every town and city in this country needs to know that this government is on their side, that we match their aspirations, and that by working together we will make every community a better one to live in. These are ideals that are at the heart of this government, at the heart of the work that I do every day, and we will not stop until we have completed this mission. I am determined to tackle poverty, in particular child poverty. And as I look at the next steps on welfare policy and at the DWP budget, including at the spending review, I will of course look at what more can be done to address poverty. Mr Speaker, this is what it means to be a compassionate government, one that supports work, lets dreams become reality and helps those in need. We will work tirelessly to deliver that. I commend the statement to the House.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for sight of her statement today. Today's figures are truly shocking. They highlight the devastating impact of austerity on families across the country. It is a national scandal that 14 million people, including 4.1 million children, are living in poverty in one of the richest countries in the world. Yet this statement today is marked by complacency and denial. We know that as universal credit has rolled out across the country, we have witnessed a sharp increase in food bank use. We are one of the richest countries in the world, and this is a source of national shame. We are seeing families unable to feed their children. As a former school teacher, Mr Speaker, I can tell you I know what it's like when children are hungry and in school. They cannot learn, they're unhappy, they're worried, and they don't want their parents to know how worried they are. This is a scandal that has to be addressed. Yet, in the face of this human misery, we hear the Secretary of State attempt to justify austerity and this government's clear political decision to balance the books on the back of the poor and disabled. This is a disgrace. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimates that continuing the benefits freeze for a fourth year will mean that families will be on average £560 worse off as a result. The Secretary of State said on the 10th of January that the freeze was the right policy at the time. If it isn't the right policy now, why is it being continued until April 2020? And why was there nothing in this statement to address this? The government has in the past responded to our criticism of the rises in relative poverty by saying that it's absolute poverty that matters. Well, we all know that we have to look at all measures of poverty. So what is the Secretary of State's response then to her department's figures today showing that the number of children living in absolute poverty before housing costs has increased by 300,000 and after housing costs by 200,000 in 2017-18? And it is truly shocking that the number of people in absolute poverty before housing costs increased by 600,000 in that year. Evidence of the crisis in poverty in our country is clear. Yet last year, the Secretary of State criticised what she said was the political nature of the report by the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights when he delivered his report last November. This was really quite a shocking statement, as if somehow poverty has nothing to do with politics. After her own department's figures showing this increase of 600,000 in the number of people in absolute poverty in 2017-18, will she now accept that he was simply telling the truth about poverty in this country? And we see the number of pensioners living in poverty rise by 100,000 in 2017-18, and that means it's increased by 400,000 since 2010 under the Conservatives. So will the government now reconsider its plans to force mixed-age couples to claim universal credit rather than pension credit when one partner has reached state pension age but the other hasn't? Or is it determined to go ahead and break the Conservative Party manifesto promise on this? The Secretary of State claims that work and health and well-being are being improved. Well, I ask her to think what that means to all of those people on zero-hour contracts. The individuals with 3 zero-hour contracts, so they're not even able to secure a pension because their different contracts don't meet the threshold. She talks of universal credit as a force to good. That is laughable for those who look at this, and misery for those experiencing it. We've seen delays, 5-week waits, inability to tackle fluctuating incomes, so that we're having people on the same income getting very different levels of benefit from the social security system. To conclude then, when will the government wake up to the poverty crisis that is besetting our country and tackle this and deliver people the security that they need?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady, it is because we care so much about the changes in poverty that I have come here in order to answer anybody's questions and to make a statement about these statistics that came out today. On pensioner poverty, actually, pensioner poverty is at a near record low because of this government's commitment to the triple lock. And I would gently point out to her as well that the only reason we are able to fund something like the triple lock is because this Conservative government is running a strong economy, centring this back on how we deliver our benefits, whether for pensioners or for people in working age, is absolutely key to being able to deliver those important contributions. She mentioned the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and I would also say to her the Joseph Rowntree Foundation analysis shows that universal credit will reduce the number of people in poverty in working families by 300,000. The fact that she continues to attack universal credit shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the changes that universal credit brings to people's lives. And I would urge the Honourable Lady to engage with her job centre to speak more to the work coaches and to the clients. And she will find, as I have found, how much positive response there is to universal credit. Many people I know are still concerned about it, but in my experience and in many other MPs' experience, and if I may say so, that is across the House, tell me that once people have engaged with universal credit, once they're on it, they realise that it's a much more positive source of their income than the previous benefits were at all. And I'd also like to point out that there are many different sources of poverty. And one of the areas that we have particularly made sure that we put more money into is children on the lowest incomes in schools, because that is a way of ensuring that we bridge the gap between people born into different households. And under this government, education attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and all other pupils at Key Stage 4 has narrowed by 9.5% since 2011. The pupil premium, which most colleagues will be aware of, is incredibly important for focusing additional funds on pupils on the lowest incomes. It's this combination of initiatives funded by this government that will help to reduce the poverty gap.
Sir Desmond Swain.
To what extent does the growth of tax credits actually reduce the level of wages?
I think I would answer that, Mr. Speaker, by inviting the honourable gentleman to come into my department and find out a little bit more about how universal credit works, how the taper rate has changed the benefit system, how people who are now go into a job and earn more in their wages receive less from their benefits, but only at a very gentle trajectory. That taper is a way of ensuring that there isn't the sort of trade-off that he's hinting at from the previous system of tax credits.
And I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement. There's long been a debate in this place about whether it should be absolute or relative poverty that is measured, and I wish the Secretary of State would look at the work of the Social Metrics Commission in this regard. But regardless of the measure that we're talking about, this government is presiding over a trend of rising impoverishment. The child poverty rate before housing costs is up 400,000 in relative and 300,000 in absolute poverty in a year, taking it to the highest levels in almost 20 years before housing costs. After housing costs sees a stagnation in relative terms and a 200,000 rise in absolute terms. Severe poverty and material deprivation are both up 4 to 5% for all children. The Secretary of State must know that the impact policy, particularly social security policy, has on poverty levels. She spoke of the power of her department in this regard. When there is an investment, poverty levels drop, and when there are cuts to individuals, levels rise. And that is why ending the benefit freeze this year would have been the best place to start, to stop, in some cases, reverse the rising poverty trend. And she could have also lifted the two-child cap, which is cuts directed at children. It is impoverishing children. Why has she not done the right thing in these areas? The Secretary of State has taken some welcome steps. She has moved further than any of her 5 predecessors that I have dealt with, but I know she understands she must go further. And these figures should put a rocket under the discussions that she is having with the Chancellor ahead of the spending review. Work should be a route out of poverty, but it currently isn't. So what does she see? What does she see as being her key anti-poverty policy? What is her anti-poverty target for this next year, when we know that Brexit, whatever type of Brexit occurs, will harm family budgets and affect living standards?
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his partially constructive comments, if I may put it like that. As far as the Social Metrics Commission and assessment on poverty is concerned, we are looking at it. I think it's an interesting approach in that it puts the measure of poverty back also towards what people spend their money on, as well as what they actually get in. So it's a fair point to raise with me, and I will come back to him when we have some further conclusions on it. He highlights particularly the difficulty that families have and the issue of moving into full-time work. And I would say to him that one of the commitments that we have made is to make that more straightforward by enabling there to be more free childcare. We've now made sure that there is more money invested per year in childcare. It's gone up from 4 billion to 6 billion, so there's 30 hours of free childcare for people with 3- and 4-year-olds. I think that's an important change to making sure that people can go into full-time work. He highlights the difficulty of people on low incomes in part-time work, and we recognise that. And that's why we're trying to make it easier for people to go into full-time work, because there are much lower instances of poverty where there are 2 full-time parents in work. And that surely must be the goal for people.
Alex Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that one of the most damaging things for a child's life chances is if they grow up in a workless household? And consequently, will she commit to invest more in universal support to help people with difficulties overcome them and move into long-term employment?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Households with nobody in work are much more likely to be in poverty and are a bad role model for everybody else. And actually making sure that we engage successfully with households so that everybody in there has an opportunity of job is very important. There are now 665,000 fewer children in workless households since 2010.
Frank Field.
Isn't the most horrifying omission from the Secretary of State's statement today is that we live in a country where people are cold and hungry and pushed into destitution? When does she expect to be able to rise in that place and report on the numbers in destitution? And as it has been claimants, by having cuts in their living standards, contributing so much to the revival of public finances, will she allow herself to be judged by how much she gets when the Chancellor starts giving away, making sure those monies go to the poor first, who contributed most?
Well, the right honourable gentleman is made aware than many people about the fact that a lot more money has been put by the Chancellor into the welfare system, and we know also that it's going to be, when it's fully rolled out, 2 billion more generous than the system it inherited. But I would also say to the right honourable gentleman, and he knows this more than anybody else, is that important though welfare contributions are, and committed as I am to making sure that universal credit works for everyone, the causes of poverty are not allayed by benefits alone, which is why we've made such a commitment to invest in the poorest children through the pupil premium, to making sure we invest 33 billion a year additional into the health service by 2023. All these additional investments will help people on the lowest incomes have a better quality of life.
Thank Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree that it's right we look at the pressures on people's incomes in the round? So we also look at the cost of childcare, which we are addressing as a government. We look at taking people out of tax, which we are addressing as a government. And we look at rising and putting up the lowest paid people, the poorest people on the lowest wages. So can she confirm that the national living wage is in fact rising and that will benefit a lot of people on low incomes?
Well, my honourable friend is right. It is next week that the national living wage will go up to £8.21, which is the highest it's ever been. I would also point out that the rate at which people start to pay tax is rising to £12,500. It wasn't very long ago that people on very low incomes, as low as £6,500, could be paying tax, and that has changed under this and the last government.
Kate Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's welcome to see the Secretary of State gradually repairing the damage that has been done by her predecessors as a result of caps, cuts and freezes. But she will accept, I'm sure, that she has a long way to go to match Labour's excellent record of taking 1 million children out of relative poverty. Will she pay particular attention to the high risk of poverty among larger families? And I welcome the first step she's taken in relation to the two-child poverty policy. But she will know that larger families face a particular risk of poverty. So will she look at removing that two-child limit altogether?
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the honourable lady that since entering government in 2010, we have still removed 400,000 people out of absolute poverty. I have acknowledged, and this is why I'm here today, that today's statistics are disappointing. And I am highlighting that there is more to be done, both in terms of other services around benefits and in terms of my engagement with the Chancellor. And she raises an important point, that it is often people with the largest families who have the difficulties, and that is an area I will be looking at ahead of the spending review, but we will not be changing the two-child policy, which is still an important part of fairness in the benefits system for the people who pay the tax as well.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the regular challenges those in poverty face is around finding suitable accommodation, as referenced in the Secretary of State's statement. What work is she doing in relation to talking with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to ensure we actually deliver the quality homes people need at an affordable price across the country?
Well, it's such a good point from my honourable friend. He is right that poor quality accommodation is something that we need to constantly address, and making sure that that accommodation is also affordable. And I am engaged in conversations with my right honourable friend, the Minister for Communities and Local Government, to ensure that we address it together.
Emma Lulabach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Recognising the direct link between this government's punitive welfare reform agenda and rising levels of absolute grinding poverty, over 7 months ago, leaked documents showed the department began a study into factors driving the use of food banks. It's due to be concluded in October. What's the interim findings?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady is right. We are looking at the facts to do with food banks, and I want to take a very open approach to finding out what is going on and what the drivers are, because sometimes there are quite a lot of conclusions, and I want to make sure that there is an opportunity to do some myth-busting and find out what we can do to allay it.
I've been listening carefully, Mr. Speaker. Have I got this correct? Since 2010, 400,000 people have been taken out of absolute poverty. 665,000 fewer children are in workless households. 1.7 million people are no longer paying income tax because of the increase in the personal allowance. And the national minimum wage is now at record ever levels.
Well, I thank my honourable friends for so succinctly summing up the good news for us, and I would add to that that income inequality has also fallen.
Bridget Phillipson.
Mr. Speaker, no child in modern Britain should grow up in poverty, and frankly it should be a source of shame for ministers that today we are seeing child poverty rising even by their own preferred measures. We are constantly told that work should be the best route out of poverty, yet for too many children that is simply not the case. Even today we've seen the percentage of children in poverty with working parents rising again. Won't she acknowledge this and change course?
I would say to the Honourable Lady that it is because I have acknowledged that these figures are disappointing and that I want to address it, that I have come here to set out what we are doing, what we have already done, and what I think are going to be the important changes to make to the welfare system in this country to ensure that we do address it. I am committed to making sure that we reduce poverty, and I'm going to be putting in place the levers that we can do so. But I would also say that these figures are nearly now 2 years out of date. And I have made sure that we are starting immediately with investing the money that the Chancellor put aside for us, £1.7 billion a year, to reduce the taper pay, to increase the work allowances, to make sure that we address some of these issues.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen-Timms.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the new commitment the Secretary of State has expressed to tackling child poverty, which these figures show is getting significantly worse. Will she look at the option of universal credit claimants foregoing their final benefit payment after they've got into a job in exchange for an upfront payment to fill the 5-week gap before
with me before, I'm always looking at ways to improve the way we deliver universal credit. I have said to him that I will look at that and I will continue to engage with everybody across the House to find ways of improving on the delivery of universal credit. I do feel that the advances that are available to people on the day one that they apply for universal credit is the way to ensure that people can have access to money as soon as they need it. And that is working well, with over 60% of claimants now taking advantage of that.
Chris Stevens.
Speaker, but the problem with that answer, and as the chair of the Select Committee said, when he visited the Glasgow South West Food Bank a couple of weeks ago, people are not taking the advance payment because it's a loan and they don't want to be in more debt. So can I press the Secretary of State tell us, firstly, how much does it cost to administer advance payments, and it would not be better that that would be the first payment for all claimants?
Well, I can say to the Honourable Gentleman that he can call it a loan, I can call it an advance. The fact is, it is a way of getting money that is going to be paid to the claimant to them in advance of the date they would receive it. I don't see it as a loan in the same way, and I'm looking at ways to ensure that work coaches and job centres can position it in the right way so that claimants do not face it in the same way that he has described with some fear. I want people to have confidence. This is the money they're going to be receiving. If they want to receive 13 payments effectively over 12 months, then that can be a choice they make.
Yvonne Vervaag.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the light of these figures, it's no surprise that Step Change report over 20% of their clients have no disposable income to pay off their debts. And indeed, they're borrowing for essentials like food and heating. What's being done to assist the increasing numbers of people in this situation?
Citizens' advice rollout.
I would say to the Honourable Lady, who I know is quite an expert in this area, that my colleague, the Pensions Minister, met with Step Change this week. We're committed to making sure that there is sufficient advice available to people who need it so that they can help to budget. A lot of people come on to universal credit with quite significant debts, and one of the issues that we have addressed is making sure that the debts that they have to repay out of their universal credit is reduced from 40% to 30%, and we've also set up the single financial guidance body. We're very aware that people often arrive with debts, and we want to help them manage them so that they can have a sufficient income to manage on the universal credit they receive.
Gregory Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, the successive Chancellors have been lobbied by myself and colleagues to raise the personal allowance, which the Minister has alluded to, and that is welcome and good news. The problem now is that those in part-time employment and in very low pay, it is totally irrelevant to them because they earn less than what the personal allowance is. So what is the Minister doing to raise the skills level, to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises get training and offers to help that skills base so that people are not welfare dependent at all?
Well, it's a very good question from the Honourable Gentleman. We have raised the tax allowance, as he said, and that has been very successful. But I would like us to do more to help people move on in work from a small amount of hours or to higher skills, and that is something I'm going to be looking at over the next few months to see what there is some provision available, and some job centres do a fantastic job of continuing in that engagement to help people into better jobs or more hours, but that is something I would like to look at to see what else we can do.
Hugh Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your government always says that in-work is better, but in-work poverty is rising, food banks are rising. You say you're going to look at the minimum wage. Will you make it £10 an hour?
He wasn't here at the beginning.
Living wage is going up.
Mr. Speaker, it is the case that I want more people to be able to have the security of a full-time job and of better paid jobs. And that's why my answer to the gentleman who spoke earlier, I've said that we will be working on seeing what else we can do about in-work progression to ensure that people don't stay on low wages, they can progress and they can get the advantage of a growing economy, because this government is committed to making sure that we have better jobs, more jobs, and we are proud of the employment record we have created.
Alison Hewlett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has the audacity to claim that no one in Britain should have their future determined by the circumstances they are born into. Mr. Speaker, that's simply not the case, because a third child born on the 5th of April 2017 will be entitled to benefits, but a baby born on the 6th of April 2017 will not. Families of religious faith, families of ethnic minorities are disproportionately affected by the two-child limit. She has set up a two-tier system, an unacceptable, unjustifiable two-tier system for families in this country. And women will still have to prove if they have had their third child as the result of rape. Why does she think this is acceptable?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady has raised this with me many times, and I would repeat to her that I do think the system is the right system. She has to also think of the people on low wages who pay taxes, who will say to us, and I know as an MP I've had people saying this to me, and I expect there have been others as well, who have to plan for their third child or fourth child and have to work out whether they have the funds to do so. And I think it's right that people who are on benefits have to make the same assessment as well for their families.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1998, child poverty was 3 million. By 2010, that was reduced to 1.6 million. Now it is 3.7 million. That was an historic achievement under Labour. Now this government has not only reversed it, but even made it even worse. That is a shame. You call it disappointing. Sorry, the Minister calls it disappointing. I call it disastrous. Absolutely disastrous failure by this government. And the reality is that reduction wasn't achieved by accident. It was done by massive, sustained, above-inflation increases in social security support. That is something this government has broken the link with by its welfare cap policy and its arbitrary restrictions on welfare spending. Will the Minister accept that is the simple reality of the situation until you reverse that idea and return to a welfare system that is based on automatic stabilisers and an inherent right to support per person? That will not be changed at all.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry I will disappoint the honourable gentleman. I think we have the right welfare system, a welfare system that protects the most vulnerable, that provides the safety net that we need and helps people into work. Under the Labour system, people were abandoned on out-of-work benefits and were not helped. Under this government, we ensure that they do engage with the job centres and with the work coaches to make sure that they have the opportunity of a job.
Ellie Reeves.
Mr. Speaker, £23 a week, £25 a week, £20 a week. These are all sums the government has told my Lewisham Western Penge constituents on universal credit that they should be able to live on after rent and basic utilities. With over 72,000 emergency food supplies given to Londoners over a 6-month period, will the Secretary of State take responsibility for the shambles of universal credit and stop the rollout?
Well, I would remind the Honourable Lady that under Labour, unemployment rose every time. Under this government, we're ensuring that there are jobs available, more people in work than ever before. And I would hope that at her job centre, the work coaches are able to help people into work because there are jobs available, and that ultimately is what will help her constituents and her families have a better quality of life.
Alison McGovern.
Mr. Speaker, she and I were in this House when the Conservatives repealed the Child Poverty Act, and she and I were in this House when George Osborne announced £12 billion worth of welfare cuts that have not been restored. So she can be disappointed, but she cannot be surprised that child poverty is up by 200,000, with 65% of children in single-parent families in poverty. Isn't it time she came to that dispatch box and confirmed that no child in a single-parent family will be worse off under her system?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady that we have still lifted 400,000 people out of absolute poverty since 2010. I acknowledge that there is more to do, and we have seen the Chancellor over the last 2 budgets put substantial additional sums in, and we've now got £1.7 billion a year coming in for the next 3 years. So I hope that these changes will make a significant difference to improving the delivery of our welfare to people directly in her constituency.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, under previous Labour governments, we had a commitment to eradicate child poverty by 2020. I wondered if the Secretary of State could say by which date her government plans to eradicate child poverty in this country.
Mr. Speaker, I can say to the Honourable Lady that I am committed to making sure that we reduce poverty and that we focus particularly on child poverty. I would also say that we must remember that it's not entirely about welfare benefits. It's also about having a strong economy where we can see wages grow and we can see better quality of jobs available for everybody. But I would like to reassure that I am focused on making sure that we reduce poverty.
David Hanson.
Any child born in poverty is disappointing, but the situation is it's not evenly spread. I have wards in my constituency such as Flint Castle at 42% of child poverty, Holywell Central at 42%, and 3 other wards in the top 30s. What strategy does she have to particularly tackle those areas where there is high levels of deprivation and high levels of child poverty?
Well, I would hope that the personalised support of attainment from work coaches will help to give that sort of support that the Honourable Gentleman is looking for. But I would also say that the pupil premium that we have available for schools should help focus on those children from the most deprived areas so that they can get the extra funds at schools to give them the additional support that they need.
I don't know what the motion is. Marion Fellows.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State realise that the majority of households affected by the 2-child benefit limit are in work? The Secretary of State is pushing them into poverty. Why?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady that the best way for poverty to be solved for families is for the parents to be able to access full-time work. I know the Honourable Lady is referring to some of the people having access to work, but I would like to say that it's more important they also are able to get into full-time work, which will help them reduce the poverty in their families.
Seems to be moving back. Karen Butt.
The Secretary of State may talk of her compassion, but the facts are brutal, both in terms of rising poverty levels and the experience of children's lives in poverty. But does she find it awkward that last week a report commissioned by the government on the causes of homelessness found that amongst the key drivers were, and I quote, reduced welfare and benefits and rising levels of poverty? And if she does find it awkward, what's she going to do about it?
Well, I'm sure the Honourable Lady will be aware that we have now seen a plateauing of the amount of people who are homeless. We have a successful homelessness reduction strategy that is beginning. I acknowledge that it had gone up, and we're now seeing it come down, which shows that the homelessness strategy is working, and we're committed to making sure that we continue it to see less people who are homeless across the country.
No idea, but I'll make sure we're doing this. Deirdre Brock.
The Secretary of State has to get real about the impact of her government's policies on real people's lives. Since April 2016, the price of butter has gone up by 23%, sugar 17% and bread 11%, but benefits have been frozen at 2015-16 prices. Why won't she take action to lift this punitive benefit freeze for its final year?
Yeah. Well, actually, the Honourable Lady has focused on an important driver of these statistics, and that is the surprising rise of inflation. Inflation in the year in question was 2.8% when it was not expected to be, and that's one of the contributions to the rise over that year in the amount of people in poverty. But I believe that the changes that we've made since then, Mr. Speaker, will help to address that so that people are able to have higher levels of consumer purchasing power at home.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much. I welcome both the Secretary of State's statement for prior sight and also the sentiment in it and her commitment to reducing child poverty. But Secretary of State, I come from a family where we had working father, 3 children, relatively comfortable, which changed overnight. We became a single-parent family with 3 children. The 2-child cap could have driven my mother and the 3 of us into poverty. Can the Secretary of State look at how that cap can be modified to allow for the possibility that people are not always aware of what the future is going to hold when they have their children?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, and I recognise that for single parents it can be hard to manage on funds and also hard sometimes to manage childcare in terms of being able to access work, which is why actually I'm pleased that one of the things this government has done is increase the amount of free childcare that's available. So I hope that a single mother in that situation would be able to access more work than she would otherwise have been able to do.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you. These statistics show that pensioner poverty, by all measures, is up by £100,000. Her government is trying to cut thousands of pounds each year for disadvantaged older people through the pension credit changes. Will the Secretary of State give the House a vote on these changes, and can she explain why this government is consistently attacking and abandoning our older people, not least women born in the 1950s?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady that because of the triple lock, we have protected pensioners' income, and actually pensioners' poverty over the past 3 decades or so has halved. They are most respected by this government, and we know that we must always look after pensioners. I would say to colleagues right across the House that universal credit is helping people getting into jobs. It is making sure that the work coaches have a personal approach to individuals, and if they have not had the opportunity to engage with their work coaches in their job centres, I would urge them to do so. We know that they are being successful. Joseph Rowntree recently said to us that 300,000 people are likely to come out of poverty as a result of universal credit. That is good progress, and we will continue to build on that.
Thank you. Order. Business statement. Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Actually, strictly speaking, no, it's not business question, it's business statement, and therefore we start with the Leader of the House. The Leader of the House, Lord President of the Council, Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, we'll get the hang of it. It's because we're all confused by yesterday. Mr. Speaker, subject to the House approving the motion on the order paper in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, this evening, the business for tomorrow will be Friday the 29th of March, debate on a motion relating to the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. The business for next week will be Monday the 1st of April, business motion relating to the resolution of the House dated 27th of March, followed by motions relating to the resolution of the House dated the 27th of March. Followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Animal Health, Plant Health, Seeds and Seed Potatoes Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2019. That old potato. Followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Protecting Against the Effects of Extraterritorial Application of Third Country Legislation Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2019. Tuesday the 2nd of April, a motion relating to the first report from the Committee of Privileges, followed by consideration of Lords' amendments relating to the Mental Capacity Amendment Bill Lords, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Geo-blocking Regulation Revocation EU Exit Regulations 2019. Wednesday the 3rd of April, a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Electronic Communications Amendment etc. EU Exit Regulations 2019, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Trade in Torture etc. Goods Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2019, followed by a general debate on the 50th anniversary of the continuous at-sea deterrent. Thursday the 4th of April, debate on a motion relating to the introduction of the 2019 loan charge, followed by a debate on a motion relating to restrictive intervention of children and young people. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. On Friday, the 5th of April, the House will not be sitting. Mr. Speaker, colleagues will note that at this moment in time, we are not bringing forward the motion for Easter recess. I know that members have a great deal of responsibilities to carry out in their constituencies and with other matters. However, the House rightly needs time to address our exit from the European Union, and our constituents will expect Parliament to work flat out to do so. I will seek to provide further clarity on the recess dates as soon as possible, and I would like to express all of our thanks to the civil servants, House staff and staff of MPs who are continuing to ensure we're well supported at this important time. Mr. Speaker, I want to provide the House with further clarity on tomorrow's sitting day. Should the House agree the motion in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, later today, it is intended that the hours will be the same as for a normal sitting Friday, with the House sitting at 9:30 a.m. and the moment of interruption at 2:30 p.m. If agreed by the House, tomorrow there will be a motion relating to the UK's exit from the EU. The motion tabled will comply with the Speaker's ruling, but the only way we ensure we leave in good time on May the 22nd is by approving the withdrawal agreement by 11 p.m. on the 29th of March, which is tomorrow. The European Council has agreed to an extension until the 22nd of May, provided that the withdrawal agreement is approved by the House of Commons this week. It is crucial that we make every effort to give effect to that and to allow the House to debate this important issue. We do not want to be in the situation of asking for another extension and, of course, for the requirement to undertake European Parliament elections. Thank you.
Valerie Baz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the House for the statement, which I think we've only just received about 2 minutes before I came into the chamber, and certainly I'm not sure how much discussion there was with the usual channels. Certainly, the business managers have not seen the content of the motion, so I would like further clarity on behalf of the whole House whether this is in fact the meaningful vote 3. I understand what the leader said about complying with the Speaker's ruling. I don't know if, Mr. Speaker, you've had any discussions about the motion or whether this is in fact the meaningful vote 3. I understand the government have to comply with what the EU have said, but there was a bit of kind of we need more clarity on what exactly this motion is about, what exactly is, whether it is the meaningful, whether it is the agreement, whether it is the full package, or exactly what it is. And I don't think this is, again, the way to conduct business in the House on such an important matter. I mean, the leader has given the times, but only just. There are people who have to make adjustments to their and I'm not talking about members, I'm talking about the staff of this House, the doorkeepers and all the civil servants. But I do want to touch on and to say thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was a new process yesterday, and I thought the staff, clerks and all the staff of the House rose to the occasion. It was actually very smooth. We voted in the correct lobbies and we voted on the green sheets, which makes a nice change from the pink sheets. But nevertheless, it was smooth, and I thank them for working late to get the result to us on time, and we waited patiently for that. Yesterday was quite an interesting time. It was sort of like a confluence, not just about process, but to me, it was a confluence of process and principle. And we know that the House can do that, and we know that the House can be a modernising place. The Leader of the House yesterday will have heard that opposition calls for an opposition day. Could she announce, could she say when the next opposition day will be? This is a 2-year session. And my honourable friend, the member for Battersea, I'm not sure if the leader was in the House yesterday when my honourable friend made a point of order about the Minister for Disabled People. I don't think that person has been appointed. I understand the Minister has stepped up today with the urgent question today, but I don't think he is the Minister for Disabled People. There are 13.9 million disabled people who need a Minister who will champion their needs. And I don't know if the leader is aware that we've had 7 since 2010. There are also a number of other vacancies. My honourable friend, the member for North East Bedfordshire, the member for Winchester and Watford, have all resigned their positions. Their key roles, Middle East and North Africa, public health and primary care, and business and industry, and a number of PPSs have also resigned. I think it's about time we have an updated list of ministerial responsibilities. I wonder if the leader could provide that. Mr. Speaker, the leader, I'm sure, will have been aware of this survey carried out by Sir John Curtis for the independent agency, the National Centre for Social Research, one of the few people who call the elections the correct result of the elections. He found that 85% of those who voted Remain, 80% of those who voted Leave in 2016 think that the government has handled Brexit badly. And amongst our voters, just 7% believe that the government has handled Brexit well. The government keeps saying to us this is the mandate from the people, but I think all honourable members will know that the government have had no problem in U-turning on their manifesto commitments. Like, I'll give two examples: means test on winter fuel payments, and just 4 days after the manifesto was published, they U-turned on the so-called dementia tax. Yesterday, the Prime Minister in Prime Minister's Question Time says we have a deal that cancels our EU membership. That's not strictly correct, because in the withdrawal agreement, it is littered of how we have to pay into the EU to secure the benefits. I'll give her an example: communication infrastructure at page 51 of the agreement of March 2019. I say that because the European Parliament voted earlier this month to guarantee funding for UK students who are already on the Erasmus Plus programme. In the event of a no deal, they promised to supporting European students in the UK on that scheme. There are now 17,000 students here who plan to study in Europe under Erasmus Plus. They still face the uncertainty of whether they can do that from September. So where is the government's commitment to our future, those students who want to work in the EU? Can we have a statement from the Secretary of State whether funding for those students will be guaranteed? And Mr. Speaker, I've heard nothing in any statement about the revelations in The Guardian that the government have spent £12 million for a penthouse for the trade envoy. Could we have a statement on whether that was public money, that public money has been properly spent, and are we going to spend that sort of money in all the countries where we have a trade envoy? And when will the government respond to the report on the Joint Committee for Human Rights, chaired by my honourable friend, the member for Camberwell and Peckham? They concluded that more than 3 million Europeans living in Britain would be left in legal limbo after Brexit. The committee proposed amendments to the Immigration and Social Security Coordination EU Withdrawal Bill. Can we have a statement from the government as to whether they will be protected? And could we have a timetable on the progress of the key legislation that needs to pass through Parliament before exit day? Now, Mr. Speaker, Monday, the 25th of March, was International Day of Remembrance for victims of slavery and transatlantic slave trade. It is vital that we remember this history and treat everyone equally. My honourable friend, the member for Manchester Gorton, raised at PMQs yesterday that 15 Conservative councillors were suspended for posting racist or Islamophobic content online and have now been let back into the party. They referred to some of their members referred to people as cavemen and the Saudis as sand peasants, and compared Asian people to dogs. Mr. Speaker, a man puts on an England shirt, scores a goal and is racially abused. We stand with Raheem Sterling.
Leader of the House.
Well, can I first of all say I completely agree with the Honourable Lady that any form of racism is absolutely abhorrent and must be stamped out wherever it's seen. She asks about the issues of the statements I've just made and the motion for tomorrow. And what I can say to her, as I've already said, is that we recognise that any motion brought forward tomorrow will need to be compliant with the Speaker's ruling, and that discussion is ongoing, and a motion will be tabled just as soon as possible, and obviously by later today, in order for the House to consider the motion in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. She asks about opposition days, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all members right across the House, as well as the tremendous work by civil servants that's gone into the secondary legislation programme. And the reason why, obviously, we're tabling a number of statutory instruments that are related to Brexit is to ensure that we have completed our secondary legislation programme. And what I can say is that all of those statutory instruments needed for exit day have now been dealt with appropriately. Members have spent over 120 hours debating over 230 EU exit SIs in this parliamentary session, and also the Sifting Committee has considered over 220 proposed negative SIs, recommending over 60 of them for upgrade to the affirmative procedure. That's a huge amount of work for which I am very grateful. The Honourable Lady asks for an updated list of ministerial responsibilities, and I will certainly take that away and seek that as soon as possible. She asks about the issue for European citizens, and I'm sure she will be pleased that the government has brought forward through the Immigration Minister the UK-wide campaign for the EU settlement scheme, which will include billboards and radio advertising to make sure that everyone who is eligible knows how to apply and to get the status they need. It's this government's priority to make sure that EU citizens who've built their lives here and who've contributed so much to our society know that they are absolutely welcome in the United Kingdom. She asks about the new residents in New York. I can absolutely assure her that we've secured the best possible deal and value for money on a property that will help promote the United Kingdom in the commercial capital of our largest export market and a trading partner for years to come. She will appreciate that the diplomatic and trade-related activities around the world generate billions of income in the United Kingdom. And as well as that, we're in the process of selling the Consul General's current residence, which will therefore reduce the cost of creating that new centre of expertise. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the Honourable Lady for her comments about racism. She always stands up for those who've been racially abused, and she's absolutely right to do so. And I will always support her in her efforts to stamp out racism wherever we see it.
Sir David Amis.
Will my right honourable friend find time for a debate on what further help the government can give to small businesses? We all know that the lifeblood of our local parades is often the convenience store and post offices. But yet, under permitted development, freeholders can often change from commercial to residential, and that gives very little security to leasehold convenience stores.
That's her real then. Yes, my honourable friend raises a very important point. Our high streets and small businesses are so important to the communities that rely on them. That's why we do need to recognise the challenges they face and support them to survive and thrive. The planning system has a vital role to play in this, and the Spring Statement announced further changes to permitted development rights. And we're also extending the period of temporary use from 2 to 3 years to give start-ups more time to establish their businesses.
Pete Wishart.
Can I thank the House for whatever that was supposed to be this morning? I've actually got the real business for next week, and this is it here. A blank sheet of paper. They just haven't got a clue what's going on anymore. They are totally at the mercy of events, of parliamentary arithmetic and all sorts of party shenanigans. It's only this morning that they've now confirmed that we're actually sitting tomorrow, and they've just confirmed at last that Easter recess is to be cancelled, but we don't know about the second week. They can't even tell us who'll be at the dispatch box next Wednesday as their Prime Minister. This is beyond shambles, Mr. Speaker. Maybe it should be the right honourable member, the member for West Dorset, at the dispatch box announcing the business, because he could make a worse mess of it than this, and he's almost like the Leader of the House anyway just now. Now, the only thing everybody wants to hear from the Leader of the House is and if they are bringing back this meaningful vote tomorrow, because what's on the order paper clearly isn't this. She's got to 5 o'clock today to put forward a proper motion on this. So is she going to do it? Are we going to have the meaningful vote tomorrow? Yes or no? Because it's clear that the back me then sack me strategy has spectacularly failed. And this is a Prime Minister who can't even get her departure right, even when everybody wants her gone. And the race to replace her has begun, and I understand there's 22 of honourable and right honourable members featuring in the leadership race. But can I say to the Leader of the House, she's not amongst the favourites this time. Maybe if she promises to resign immediately she gets elected, her chances will be boosted significantly. But our constituents are watching this with increasing horror. They're confused, they're frustrated, they're bewildered, and they're increasingly angry. This is what these Conservatives have done to us. They've divided a nation and paralysed a Parliament. Thank goodness the people of Scotland have a get-out card and a way out of this madness. Because, as it becomes increasingly apparent that a UK solution for Scotland to remain in the European Union is disappearing, more and more people are recognised there's only a Scottish solution that will rescue our EU membership.
Well, Mr. Speaker, before I respond to the honourable gentleman's remarks, I do have to put something very important on the record. I understand that I'm over 2 weeks late in wishing him a very happy birthday. But, wait for the punchline. I can more than make it up to him, because today is a bumper edition of Cake Thursdays in the Leader's office, as we have 4 birthdays over the next few days. So I do hope he'll swing by after business questions for a slice of Colin the Caterpillar. And other cakes are available. Anyway, in response to his very serious and important points that he made, I would also like to put on the record that I think, in spite of his slightly less than generous remarks, the Prime Minister of this country has done enormous service. She has absolutely shown her determination at all times to first of all put her country first, and second of all to make sure that we leave the European Union in line with the referendum, and I think all of us on this side of the House support her to do that.
Sir Edward Lee.
Will the Leader of the House confirm that if the withdrawal agreement is not voted for tomorrow, on Monday, my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, will take control? There is nothing to stop him now, under our procedures, from him whittling down the options to one option, which almost certainly, given the results last night, will be permanent membership of the Customs Union. There is nothing to stop him putting this in a bill. There is nothing to stop him making that an Act of Parliament. And then the choice will be between, and I say this to my colleagues, permanent membership of the Customs Union or a general election, and that, as they say, will be that.
Yep, that's it. That's it.
Well, I think my honourable friend sets out very clearly that on Monday, my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, will in fact be carrying out my role, if not that of the Prime Minister, in determining the order of business for the day and in seeking agreement from the House on a way forward. I certainly feel that this House needs to agree to fulfil on the 2016 referendum, and the Prime Minister's deal offers the means by which to deliver on that referendum, but at the same time, for those who don't want to leave the European Union, to offer the closest economic and security partnership. It is a compromise, and I do urge colleagues right across the House to back it.
Ian Mearns.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement and for announcing the 2 backbench business debates for next Thursday. We still have a hefty queue, Leader, and we have 17 as of yet unaired debates. So we are in demand, as it were. So we are always welcome for any additional time. Could the Leader of the House promise us that we are not sitting next Friday, because I'm already rearranging my diary for tomorrow and hoping to use next Friday for that purpose. So when you said that the House would not be sitting on Friday the 5th of April, did you really mean it, Leader?
Well, the honourable gentleman is a very knowledgeable and experienced Member of Parliament, and he will know that always the business statement sets out what is known at the time. But of course, because this is Parliament and things change, I cannot promise absolutely guarantee. But nevertheless, what I can tell him is that, all things being equal, the House will not be sitting next Friday.
Maggie through.
Mr. Speaker, as we prepare to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of the Second World War, would my right honourable friend consider how Parliament can best play its part in recognising the many servicemen and women who so bravely defend our country in its darkest hour?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to pay tribute to all those who suffered so much for our freedoms, and we should always value their sacrifice for us. And I will certainly take away and consider how the House can perhaps mark the outbreak of the Second World War, as she suggests.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the Leader of the House is aware that there's been a fantastic campaign to save Huddersfield Royal Infirmary over many years, from being closed as a fully functioning hospital and downgraded to a local hospital, much smaller, on a different site. The news this week from the Secretary of State for Health about saving Charing Cross Hospital has exactly the kinds of challenges that we have in Huddersfield. Could we have an early debate? Because there's obviously a change in mind and purpose and objectivity in terms of this new Secretary of State. Could we have a debate on the future of local hospitals?
Well, I'm delighted the honourable gentleman has raised his success in his local campaign for the Huddersfield Royal Infirmary. He does raise a really important point. We all have local hospitals that we're very keen to support, and I would encourage him to perhaps seek a Westminster Hall debate, because I'm sure many honourable members will have their own local hospital issues, as indeed I do, along with my excellent PPS with regards to the Horton Hospital.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
May we have an urgent statement from the University's Minister about the disgraceful situation at Bristol University, where the Free Speech Society has been told it cannot have a speaker who was the person who drew up the Extreme Speakers League table, in which Bristol University came 10th, unless it has somebody who is an independent chairperson and another speaker to balance up the views of the person who lists extremism in universities in league table order. This from a university which is said to have hosted no fewer than 9 extremist speakers on its campus. It's a disgrace, and we need to have an urgent statement about it.
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important issue, and I know all of us across this House support the idea of freedom of speech at all times, but nevertheless within the law, and that is a very important balance to be struck. But in particular, we all believe that freedom of speech in universities, to enable young people to learn different views, to be exposed to different views, is absolutely vital. And my honourable friend might well like to seek an adjournment debate so he can discuss this directly with ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now I thought the deal was a package of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration that can't be split. But the Leader of the House only mentioned the withdrawal agreement in relation to tomorrow's business. So can she confirm that to secure an extension of the Article 50 process to the 22nd of May and to comply with Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act, that this House has to approve both the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration on the future framework by the time the House rises at 2:30 tomorrow?
Well, what I can say to the Honourable Lady is that we're looking very carefully at bringing forward a motion later today that, very importantly, must comply with the Speaker's ruling, and that will be brought forward as soon as possible.
Sir John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, 200,000 nurses have left the NHS in less than a decade. 42,000 vacancies, that's 12% of the nursing workforce. So notwithstanding the small number of apprenticeships, the fact that this is widely perceived as a graduate job has robbed nursing of those who long to care and once learned to do so. Will the Leader of the House therefore arrange for a debate, mindful of the words of John Ruskin, who said, "The highest reward for a person's toil is what they become by it." It's time for a debate on practical skills. we can challenge the view that only academic accomplishment brings fulfilment. Time, Mr. Speaker, to elevate the practical.
Well, my right honourable friend raises the vital role of nurses, and it's a good opportunity to pay tribute to the amazing work that they do for so many people. What I can tell him is that there are now 16,300 more nurses on our wards than there were in 2010, over 50,000 nurses in training, and that the introduction of the new nursing degree apprenticeships and nursing associate roles will help us to build the workforce we need.
Ben Bradshaw.
Let's try again, Mr. Speaker. Is what she's announced for tomorrow meaningful vote 3 or more attempted trickery and potentially illegal trickery by the government by separating out the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration? Does she understand that would be completely intolerable, not only potentially illegal, but asking this House to vote for a completely blind Brexit? Does she also understand that she and the Prime Minister could put this House and the country out of our misery by bringing back meaningful vote 3 and making it conditional on a public vote? Why is she so frightened of the views of the British public?
I absolutely, as the honourable gentleman will know, supported the people's vote that took place in 2016. And I am absolutely determined, along with the Prime Minister, to ensure that we deliver on that.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At 5 o'clock, we're going to be asked for the sittings of the House 29th of March motion. It is very unusual for us to have such an emergency sitting on a Friday. It does seem to be rather strange that the government hasn't decided what the motion is for that day. If a motion is cannot be moved because you would not allow it, sir, is the leader guaranteeing that she is still going to move the motion at 5 o'clock for a sitting on Friday? Is that definite or is that optional?
My honourable friend should refer back to the business statement that I've just made, which still stands.
That's clear then. Chris Bryant.
There seems to be some shenaniganating going on here. I suspect what the Leader of the House is being very coy, which is not normal for her. She's normally more upfront, and maybe we could just tease it out of her. Is the plan just to bring forward the withdrawal agreement for the motion tomorrow? Yes. Because if that is the case, a lot of us in this House will think that does not meet the requirement of the Withdrawal Act, which states quite categorically that the government will not be able to ratify the withdrawal agreement unless the negotiated withdrawal agreement and the framework for the future relationship have been approved by a resolution of the House of Commons on a motion moved by a Minister of the Crown. Unless she's going to say now that tomorrow's motion is properly under the Act and would allow ratification, then frankly tomorrow is a complete and utter waste of time. We'd be better off voting against her motion later on today.
Well, I have tried to be as open as I possibly can on this. And the fact is, as the honourable gentleman will realise, what a motion that comes forward tomorrow must do is it must enable us to meet the Council conclusions which say that any unilateral commitment, statement or other act should be compatible with the letter and the spirit of the withdrawal agreement. It must also comply with the Speaker's ruling, and it must enable this House to move forward. So quite genuinely, of course it will meet UK law. Of course it will meet UK law. And the point is, the reality is that it hasn't yet been finalised, but it will be brought forward just as soon as possible in time for the House to discuss the business motion in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, this evening.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In North Kivu, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there have been more than 1,000 cases of Ebola resulting in more than 500 people dying. This is an incredibly serious situation with implications for the very large city of Goma and also for Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda and further afield, and of course throughout DRC. Could the Secretary of State for International Development or one of her colleagues come and make a statement to this House? I remember in 2014 how there were regular updates on an equally serious situation in West Africa. I believe that this has international implications and we need to hear about it.
Well, my honourable friend raises a very concerning matter, and he's absolutely right to do so. The government is working with the DRC and the World Health Organization to tackle the latest outbreak of Ebola. UK aid has played a crucial role in supporting the response since the outbreak was first announced in August 2018, and that support has provided funding and expertise to the World Health Organization for response activities in DRC and for regional preparedness. We're the leading donor by far for regional preparedness in neighbouring countries such as Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi and South Sudan. Preventing the spread of the disease not only saves lives, but also provides the stability necessary for economic growth and security.
Hilly Reeves.
Mr. Speaker, I've recently been contacted by a constituent, an EU citizen who worked here for many years before suffering ill health. She was previously entitled to housing benefit and ESA, but after these were absorbed into universal credit, she lost her entitlement because of stricter residency criteria. Many EU citizens have been plunged into poverty because of these benefit changes and no longer feel welcome. So can we please have a debate on the impact that universal credit is having on EU citizens living here?
Well, the Honourable Lady is raising a specific constituency issue, and I would encourage her to raise that directly with DWP. But what I would say again is that the government's priority is to make sure that EU citizens who've built their lives here and contributed so much to our society should continue to feel that they are very welcome here. That's the top priority, and that's why we've introduced the EU settlement scheme to make sure that as we leave the European Union, what we do will be entirely fair to those who've contributed so much to our society and our communities.
Mrs Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we did things differently in this House. We voted on 8 options, most of which we'd never given 5 minutes debate to, which I found rather upsetting. We hadn't had any legal advice on any of them, and they were all quite wisely, roundly thrown out by the House. Does the Leader of the House agree with me that when you look at the figures, which are quite stark, that the meaningful vote 2 had a majority of 123 over the top prize winner yesterday and had significant majorities over everything that happened yesterday? Given that the two options that I supported yesterday dropped off the list, Mr. Speaker, can I ask if it's possible, if we're going down this beauty contest route, that we ensure that something that got more support in the House is not ruled out by yourself, sir, and that we all have to look at what we might wish to support, and that you yourself, sir, will also look at the ruling that had the top number of 391 over the second referendum 268, that one is now not ruled out because of some ruling by yourself, sir.
Order. That's got very little to do with the business of the House for next week. I don't say it in any spirit of discourtesy to the Honourable Lady, the member for St Albans, but I'm perfectly conscious of, and capable of executing my responsibilities in relation to that business and in relation to all other business. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for West Dorset, is in the lead on the matter. Procedural propriety has been observed, and he is perfectly clear with other colleagues as to the basis sanctioned by the passage of the business of the House motion on which we will proceed in these matters. So I'm sorry if the Honourable Lady is not clear about the matter, but there's no basis for that ambiguity. The Leader of the House.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her comments, and of course she, like me, would like to see resolution. We would like to see the UK leave the EU in an orderly fashion, and again I would just urge all colleagues to seek it, to find it in their hearts, to consider finding a way forward urgently so that we can give businesses and citizens some certainty.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 12th of May will be the 25th anniversary since the devastating passing of the former leader of the Labour Party, John Smith. I have applied to the member for Gateshead's Backbench Business Committee for a debate around the 12th of May, but given it's a significant anniversary and in order to commemorate the death of John Smith properly, I wonder if the Leader of the House would consider having some government time in this place so we could commemorate the death properly.
Well, I certainly join the honourable gentleman in having fond memories of the late John Smith, and I applaud him for raising that in this chamber. I will, of course, look at it, but he will appreciate that there are often calls for government debates in paying tribute to particular individuals, and it's not always possible to offer time.
Kirsten Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Angus has seen over 15 bank closures in the past 8 years. It's one of the worst affected areas of the country with regard to closures, and Kirriemuir in my constituency will see its last bank in town gone in the summer. So can I ask the Leader of the House for a debate in this place around having banking hubs in each town so consumers have choice, around access to cash and around the role of the post office, because it's a real urgent issue for my constituents.
Yeah.
Leader of the House.
My honourable friend raises important issues on behalf of her constituents, and she's quite right to do so. Whilst obviously banks are commercial businesses, the impact of closures on communities must be understood and mitigated wherever possible. That's why we do support the industry's access to banking standard, which commits banks to carrying out a number of steps before closing any branches. We also do welcome some of the innovative solutions that banks can find to ensure they can continue to provide banking services to communities when they do close branches. And also, of course, she'll be aware that the Post Office has reached an agreement with the banks that allows more banking customers to access a wider range of services at the Post Office than ever before. I would encourage my honourable friend to perhaps seek an adjournment debate so that she can discuss this more directly with ministers.
Nick Dakin.
Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to join Councillor Glyn Williams, Mayor of Bottisford, for an event held at Bottisford Town Football Club to celebrate the role of volunteers in the community. Can we have a debate in this House to recognise and thank all volunteers across our communities for the very strong contribution they make to our communities?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a really important issue, and I think I would like certainly to pay tribute from the dispatch box to all those who do so much volunteering for our communities, and in particular to the Mayor of Bottisford, as he said, for his contribution. And we have recently had a debate in government time, because I know honourable members do like to seek that opportunity from time to time, but I will certainly take it away and look at it again.
Robert Courts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of West Oxfordshire, and no doubt all of our constituents, are puzzled when new homes are built without some of the features that in a modern age you would expect. And I'm referring to things like full fibre to the door or environmental features like solar panels. Could we have a debate in government time, please, to discuss the planning system and what should be required in this day and age of new homes?
Well, my honourable friend raises a point that many honourable members will support, I'm sure. I can tell him that building the homes our country needs is our top policy priority domestically. We want everyone to afford a safe and decent place to call their own, and to help many more people onto the housing ladder. Over 222,000 new homes were built last year, the highest level we've seen in all but one of the last 31 years. And the average cost of installing solar panels at home has fallen by around 2/3 since 2010. Finally, as my honourable friend may know, we've committed over £1 billion to next generation digital infrastructure and have committed to full fibre connections for the majority of homes and businesses by 2025. I would encourage him, however, to seek an adjournment debate so that he can discuss his ideas directly with ministers.
Liz McInnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When February recess was cancelled, I know that many of the House staff were very unhappy about having to cancel leave at short notice. I'd like to ask the Leader of the House, she's been deliberately opaque about the Easter recess. What talks is she having with the staff trade unions about the possibility of staff having to cancel the leave at short notice?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that recesses are always subject to the progress of business, and no motion was brought forward. So whilst the dates for Easter recess were announced, the motion was not brought forward. There are constant discussions going on. The House staff are very aware and are extremely professional, and I pay absolute tribute to them for their commitment to supporting us at all stages. But it is the case that recesses, unless the motion is brought forward, are not confirmed.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday was a very busy day in this place, but I was really pleased to see in my inbox an email from the Rail Minister announcing another £48 billion of investment in our railways. And, Mr. Speaker, I know you're a stickler for punctuality, so you'll be pleased to hear that thanks to that same Minister, for Monday, if I am more than 15 minutes late, I and other Chancellor commuters will be able to get some of our money back. So, can I ask the Leader of the House, my right honourable friend, please can we have a debate in this place about the government's outstanding track record and investment in infrastructure?
Well, my honourable friend's raised a number of points about the railways, and she's absolutely right to do so. It is the case that we will spend nearly £48 billion improving our railways to deliver better journeys. That's absolutely vital, as is the fact that when people buy their ticket, they deserve a reliable service that gets them to their destination on time. So my honourable friend might be aware that we've launched a comprehensive review of our railways to build on the successes of privatisation and to make sure we get the best from both public and private sectors.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Mr. Speaker, in a throwaway line at health questions on Tuesday, the Health Secretary withdrew the government threat to demolish Charing Cross Hospital after 7 years. So we've been partying in West London since, but now the hangovers set in. Can we have a debate on health service funding so the government can explain how it intends to deal with the £600 million backlog of works to our 3 local hospitals, the £30 million worth of cuts to our local NHSs here, and the extra £10 million we're paying to subsidise the private Babylon GP at Hand digital service promoted by the Health Secretary?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman would want to celebrate the fact that the NHS has now published its long-term plan, and the record level of funding behind it provided by this government means the NHS can continue to deliver world-class care for patients at every stage of their lives. The honourable gentleman is celebrating, as I understand it, the protection of his local hospital, and I'm delighted to share in his pleasure at that. But at the same time, he must appreciate that this government has done more for the NHS than at any time in its history, with the biggest ever investment. Under this government, the NHS is surviving and thriving.
Paul Masterton.
Mr. Speaker, at a time of great uncertainty and angst, can we have a debate on things that make us happy? Because this week a new survey was released showing that East Renfrewshire is the happiest place to live in Scotland. So can I extend a very warm invitation to the Leader of the House that if she is looking for something to spark joy, Marie Kondo style, that she makes her way north for a very warm welcome from me and my very happy constituents.
Well, the people of East Renfrewshire did unseat the Scottish Nationalist MP with a Conservative Member of Parliament, so it's not surprising that it's Scotland's happiest place to live. He does raise a very good point, though. We all need to make time for the little things that make life happy, and I would be delighted to come and visit him.
You could have a debate on the definition of happiness. I will offer a starter for 10. Victories for Arsenal Football Club and Roger Federer. Neil Gray.
Mr. Speaker, despite the sunny disposition of the Leader of the House as she comes to the dispatch box, she is still being sleek-it about tomorrow's business.
Ooh.
Can she advise whether or not it is going to be meaningful vote 3? Is she going to split the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration? And if it's not meaningful vote 3, what is the flaming point of tomorrow?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd have to add to your points, win by Northampton Saints, if you'll forgive me. Thank you very much. To the honourable gentleman's point, it is simply the case that the motion has not been finalised yet, and it will be brought forward as soon as possible. But I will say again that it needs to comply with UK law, with the EU Council resolution and, of course, with the decision that was made by the Speaker.
Charles Walker.
Fish, Mr. Speaker. Not kippers that have much to recommend them, but bass. Can I ask the Leader of the House, can we have an urgent debate on minimum fishing net size? Too many immature bass are being caught before they've had a chance to spawn, which is putting recreational fishermen, well, putting their sport at risk and putting the business of inshore fishermen, putting their businesses at risk.
I know my honourable friend is a keen fisherman and never tells a fisherman's tale, does he? No, never. But I think we are all keen supporters of this important recreation. It's one of the most popular sports, and it certainly adds to the happiness of the nation. I think the key point about leaving the European Union in this context is that we will be leaving the common fisheries policy, which will mean that the UK will be in charge of our own regulations going forward, which will help our UK fishing sector and certainly our recreational fishermen.
Chiomwara.
Mr. Speaker, and happiness is clearly Newcastle United beating Arsenal on Monday, and I look forward to watching that here in this House. But, Mr. Speaker, just as in this House, civil servants and local authorities across the country are having to deal with the consequences of government incompetence on Brexit, with key Whitehall staff moved onto Brexit and not able to do their daily duties, and Newcastle City Council, for example, expected to produce a Brexit plan when the government doesn't have one. So, could we have a debate in the House on the impact of Brexit resourcing on the delivery of public services so many of my constituents depend upon?
Well, the Honourable Lady gives me the opportunity to pay tribute to the amazing work done by civil servants and by officials right across local authorities to prepare for leaving the European Union in all circumstances. And they really have done the most amazing job. So when the Honourable Lady says there is no plan, that's simply not true. Literally nearly getting on for 3 years of work to prepare for all eventualities, involving thousands of civil servants who've shown their absolute commitment to taking the UK out of the EU in line with the referendum. And I will certainly not hear of anybody not pulling their weight or not doing a good job.
And Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, could we have a debate about the Police Scotland Youth Volunteers? Because I was in Parliament last night, I was unable to get to the annual award ceremony for the Murray Group. But a debate would allow us to celebrate and recognise the great work of Group Coordinator Yvonne Square and the dedicated work that these youth volunteers do in communities across Murray and Scotland.
Well, I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in commending Yvonne Square and all the dedicated Police Scotland youth volunteers for the work they do. The PSYV are groups of young people based across Scotland, supported by adult volunteers and led by a police constable who do great work volunteering at community and national events right across Scotland. He might well like to seek an adjournment debate so he can commend them further to ministers.
Joan Ryan.
Constituent Andrew Lindup was killed in a hit-and-run in December 2016. By the time the driver was arrested, it was too late to breathalyse him and gather evidence for a charge of dangerous driving, for which he could have faced up to 14 years in prison. Instead, he got just 6 months for failing to stop. There are serious concerns regarding the appropriateness of sentencing for this offence, particularly when the driver causes a death. Can we have an early debate on this issue? Bereaved families must know that we view this crime with the utmost concern.
Well, can I first say that's an absolute tragedy, and I'm so very sorry to hear about it. And the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise that in this chamber. I would encourage her to seek an adjournment debate so that she can discuss it directly with ministers.
Nigel Evans.
Speaker, I like the idea of a happiness debate, Mr. Speaker. People are so fraught around here. Nobody asks, how's your day been? They say, how bad's your day been? So I think that's a great idea. And Brexit is in danger, while we're trying to deliver that, of crowding out other issues. As people know, 850 people have been affected by the loan charge legislation, involving £33 million. It's led to bankruptcies, it's led to breakdowns. and sadly, it's led to suicides. Is it possible to have a statement from a Treasury Minister next week in order to see what changes can be made to alleviate their misery?
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important point, and this issue has been raised with me directly by constituents of mine. What I can say to him is that there is a debate that's being arranged by the Backbench Business Committee to discuss this very issue with ministers, and I would encourage him to take part in that. But to his other point about Brexit squeezing out other legislation, I would just like to highlight to the House that so far this session, 51 government bills have been introduced, 43 of which have already received royal assent, on important legislation ranging from counter-terrorism bill, the tenants fee bill, the Overseas Crime Production Orders Act, and of course the Voyeurism Offences Act. Some of these things really improving the lives for all of our constituents, and something we should celebrate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would seem that the country faces the imminent prospect of a new Prime Minister. So can we have a debate on the qualities required of leadership and whether it's appropriate for someone who describes Muslim women as letterboxers and historic prosecutions of child sexual abuse as spaffing money up the wall should ever be considered appropriate for the highest post in government?
Yeah. Well, the Honourable Lady talks about a debate on leadership qualities, and I certainly think that all across this House welcome good leadership where people treat each other with courtesy and respect and seek to progress the interests of all of our constituents.
Mark Pawsey.
Mr. Speaker, as a West Midlands MP, I've been delighted by the resurgence in the UK automotive industry in recent years, but was concerned to read this morning the report from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders showing a production at a 6-year low, with investment running at just 10% of 6 years ago. Mr. Speaker, this is a sector where 80% of the vehicles produced are exported. So may we have consider the decisions that we might take in this place to provide certainty and to renew confidence in this vital manufacturing sector?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the concern over the slowdown in the car manufacturing sector. And of course, businesses are crying out for certainty. They are crying out for this House to settle the issue of how we leave the European Union. And I think, again, I would just urge all honourable and right honourable colleagues across the House to consider the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement in order that we can move on and give certainty to businesses and to our constituents.
Emma Lewell-Back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the 4th of March, I raised a point of order after the press had been briefed about the government implementing key parts of my food insecurity bill. Mr. Speaker, you stated that ministers are expected to announce important policy changes to this House and that it was unsatisfactory that I had not been directly informed of developments. I then received a response to a written question on the matter with some very scant detail stating it is not usual practice for the government to make statements on private members' bills. Can the Leader of the House ensure somebody, anybody from the government responds to me fully on this matter?
Well, I'm sorry to say I wasn't aware of the situation the Honourable Lady speaks about. If she'd like to write to me after business questions, I can certainly seek a proper answer for her.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Paul Raybould was a constituent of mine and for many decades been an active trade unionist and actually was a very worthy opponent of mine for the Labour Party at the last general election. Therefore, it was great sadness I heard of his death earlier this week at the age of 55. Could we have a debate about those who, for decades, may campaign for what they believe in, may even stand for this place, but don't get elected here, but still contribute to making sure that this is a vibrant democracy?
Well, I'm sure the whole House will join my honourable friend in paying tribute to his opponent at the last election and sending our sympathies to his family at this time. He's absolutely right that amongst the passionate debate and disagreement, especially during political campaigns, we all have respect for those who put themselves forward for election. He's right that they make an invaluable contribution to making our democracy as strong as it is.
Green.
Mr. Speaker. I was surprised that there was no statement from the Government on the report this morning from the Chief Inspector of Probation into the shocking performance of the Transforming Rehabilitation programme. She states that not enough attention has been given to keeping victims safe. She speaks of poor quality work generally in the community rehabilitation companies, and she says that the privatised contracts have been a failure. Will the Leader of the House arrange for a minister to come forward with a statement to this House so we can question him on this shocking report as quickly as possible?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises a very important point. I can tell her that the Justice Minister is meeting with probation officers today and will look, of course, very carefully at what Dame Glenys' report shows up. What I can say to her is we are now providing support and supervision to an additional 40,000 offenders leaving prison and have invested an additional £22 million a year in services for offenders on release. We will be creating new arrangements for offenders in the future to build a more stable and resilient probation system, and we'll be setting out our detailed proposals later this year, but they will take very careful account of the report she mentions.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Happiness also has to be Nadal beating Federer, I think. The Wellington Monument is an iconic symbol on the Blackdown Hills in Taunton Deane and very much the gateway to the southwest. Would the Leader of the House join with me in thanking all the people involved in a fantastic project to restore this monument, which celebrates one of our greatest war heroes, who is the Duke of Wellington? It's proving to be much, much more than a monument. We're nearly at our £4 million target, and in recognition of its importance in so many ways, the National Trust have made restoring it one of their 3 top national priorities.
Good. Well, my honourable friend is a great champion of her constituents in Taunton Deane, and they're very fortunate to have her. And this very worthwhile project is undoubtedly pulling the community together. I understand that the Wellington Monument will be the tallest 3-sided obelisk in the world, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure we all wish her constituents great success with its new refurbishment.
Hugh Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Leader of the House clarify? You mentioned earlier on about 11 o'clock deadline tomorrow. And can you also tell us when the votes are expected? Because so some of us can make travel arrangements.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, to assist the House, that tomorrow's sitting day will be a normal Friday sitting day, which would start at 9:30 a.m. and finish at 2:30 p.m. at the moment of interruption.
John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in West Strother in my constituency have set up a community enterprise scheme to buy the local pub to convert it into a community cafe, community hub, post office and shop. Now these local shops and facilities, pubs, post offices are at the heart of local communities like those in my constituency, but increasingly they are being lost. Will the Leader of the House find time for a debate to praise the volunteers behind this scheme and other similar schemes and recognise the important work they are doing to keep the heart of their communities alive?
Hear, hear.
Well, can I say this sounds like an excellent initiative, and I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in wishing the West Strother community the best with their plans. He's right to raise this issue, and I agree with him that it is the hard work of local people that keeps smaller communities going. And I'm sure he's delighted, as I am, that the Chancellor recently announced the package for a Borderlands growth deal, which in addition to the Scottish Government commitment would provide the Borderlands area with a total funding package of £345 million.
Mike Gapes.
Speaker, can we have an early debate on democracy and accountability across Europe, and in particular to highlight the achievements of the European Parliament, which has done so much on roaming charges, clean beaches, air quality and many other issues? And in that debate, could we have a clarification from the government of what preparations are being made in order to fight the European Parliament elections in this country on the 23rd of May if there is a need to extend beyond April the 12th?
Well, the honourable gentleman's right to pay tribute to the work of the European Union in achieving so many good things right across the EU, including in the United Kingdom. And of course, it is this government's determination to ensure that we continue and build on that good work, as indeed we already have done in certain areas, such as, for example, introducing shared parental leave ahead of other parts of the European Union. He asks for further information on standing European elections, and as I've said earlier today, the EU Council has said that if we can agree to progress with the withdrawal agreement this week, then we will have until May the 22nd in order to legislate for the withdrawal agreement bill in order to avoid having to fight European elections.
David Morris.
Mr. Speaker, the Eden project would like to come to Morecambe, and at this moment in time £1.1 million has been raised for the feasibility study, and £100,000 has been given straight from the Chancellor from the Treasury to the Eden project. Would my right honourable friend help me to secure a debate on the floor of the House about the benefits of Eden North, the Eden project in Morecambe?
Well, that sounds like an excellent idea, and having visited the Eden project some years ago, it would be a wonderful thing for it to be able to move to his constituency and to others. So I certainly would encourage my honourable friend to seek an adjournment debate so that he can discuss it directly with ministers.
Nick Smith.
Shocking figures today show that life expectancy for women in poorer areas has declined badly under this government. This shameful inequality in our society is quietly worsening. So can we please have an urgent statement outlining concrete action so everybody reaches a good age, not just the prosperous?
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that it is our aspiration that everybody in our society is able to enjoy a long and healthy life, and that's why the government has prioritised ensuring not only that more people are able to get into work and to have the security of a pay package, but also to ensure that through universal credit people are supported when they're unable to work, and of course the significant investment that we've made in our NHS to ensure that it can help to support people to lead long and more successful lives.
Jim Shannon.
2 weeks ago, 50 innocent people were killed in Christchurch simply for practising their faith. It is clear that the rise of the far right is a growing threat to the freedom of religion or belief of people across the world. Indeed, the honourable member for Rye and Preston North, speaking in his role as Security Minister, said that a similar far right shooting absolutely could happen here in the United Kingdom. After the attack, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern called for a global fight to root out racist right-wing ideology. I believe the UK must join that fight, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, will the Leader of the House agree to a statement or debate on this extremely important issue?
Well, we were all shocked and appalled at the horrifying attack in New Zealand, and I reiterate that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of New Zealand. The Home Secretary has been very clear. The far right has absolutely no place in Britain. The British people overwhelmingly reject the prejudiced rhetoric of the far right, which is the antithesis of the values that this country represents: decency, tolerance and respect. Through our policies contest and through our counter-extremism strategy, we are dealing with the threat of extreme right-wing terrorism and the wider harms caused by the far right, including seeking to deal with community tensions, hate crime and public order issues. This is, of course, about keeping our communities safe and secure, and there will be many opportunities to discuss this with ministers in the coming weeks and months.
In Whitfield.
Mr. Speaker, given the motion that's here tomorrow, can I ask for a clarification and possibly offer the Leader of the House the opportunity that, should the withdrawal agreement be separated from the future framework, it's not the intention of the government to seek to place the responsibility for that fracturing on the conventions of this House and decisions that have been made under those conventions, is it?
No, I can just repeat, as I've said in answer to a number of questions, the motion is being carefully considered that deals with the need to meet the Council resolutions within the law of the United Kingdom and meeting the ruling of the Speaker. And as soon as that motion has been finalised, it will be brought forward for this House to consider in time for this evening's business motion.
I'll listen to you, Liz.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There have been around 130 preventable new cases of HIV in Glasgow amongst the drug-injecting community since 2015, and the British HIV Association has been the latest organisation to come out in support of a drug consumption room. Can the Leader of the House make some time for a discussion of my 10-minute rule bill on this subject, which would provide the UK Government with a legal route to allow for Glasgow to get on with the job of reducing harm and preventing deaths from drug injecting?
Well, the Honourable Lady is quite right to raise this really important matter. HIV is an appalling health problem, and we want to do everything we can, not just here in the UK, but globally, to eradicate it. I would encourage her to perhaps seek an adjournment debate so that she can raise this directly with ministers. She has a private member's bill, and time has been allocated for that, but as she will appreciate, the order of private members' bills is subject to the order in which members have put them forward.
Wayne David.
The Leader of the House has not been as clear as she might have been. But it does appear to be the case that tomorrow's vote will not be a meaningful vote because the government, it seems, has separated the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration. For it to be a statutory basis, it needs the House to approve both. But if the House debates and then approves only the withdrawal agreement, it's been suggested that that might be sufficient for this country to remain within the European Union by means of an extension of our timetable to depart. It will be to the 22nd of May. Will she confirm that that is correct or not?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is asking me a very specific question about a motion that has not yet been finalised. So that is something that I'm not at the moment in a position to answer, and I apologise to the Honourable Gentleman for not being in a position to answer it, but I've responded to many now honourable and right honourable members in the same vein. I've sought to be as transparent as possible to say that the motion will be brought forward as soon as it is finalised.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Whilst acknowledging the Leader of the House's warm words towards civil servants, can we have a debate or a statement next week on what will be the 10th consecutive year of the public sector pay cap and pay restraint for public sector workers? And is that not typified by the workers in Tate Modern, who was now the most successful UK tourist attraction, who are now balloting for industrial action for years of pay restraint? When are public sector workers going to get a decent pay rise?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman, I think, should celebrate with all honourable and right honourable members that, in fact, wages are growing at their fastest rate for a decade. That from April, the national living wage will rise again, taking the total annual pay rise for a full-time worker to over £2,750 since its introduction. But most important of all is that now we have over 3.6 million more people in work because of our reforms to welfare and our determination to back businesses. There are significant improvements to people's living standards underway now, and I think all honourable members should celebrate that.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr Speaker, last week, in the midst of this Brexit mess, the University of Nottingham held an event to celebrate their European staff. The Vice-Chancellor told colleagues that the university will remain open and welcoming, even if, especially if, the political climate does not. Will the Leader of the House join me in congratulating the University of Nottingham? And does she also share my shame that a major employer should have to go to such lengths to reassure EU citizens that they are welcomed and valued? What will she do to ensure that EU staff working here in the House know that we value them and want them to stay?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly think that the very best way that this House can show that we want to support EU citizens who are here is by supporting the Prime Minister's deal. That will ensure that EU citizens who've come to the UK, who've contributed so much and who've made their lives here, will be able to continue as before. And very importantly, it will also ensure that UK citizens who've made their lives in the European Union will be able to continue as before too.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Whilst quite rightly the House continues to discuss Brexit, the knife crime epidemic that across our nation we're seeing continues unabated. Only on Tuesday, 6 people in London were stabbed in 6 hours. In other parts of the country, people were stabbed. It just goes on and on. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police said there was a lack of interdepartmental coordination at the Home Affairs Select Committee. We have a knife crime summit which has taken a month to get to, as my honourable friend pointed out in an urgent question earlier in the week. When is the government going to get the grip that it needs and come to this House on a regular basis to make statements? On Monday, I think it is, there is the Knife Crime Summit. At the very least, can we expect, following that Knife Crime Summit, a statement by the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister to this House telling us what happened and allowing us all of us to question the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister about it?
Yeah. Well, the honourable gentleman often raises this incredibly important issue, and he's absolutely right to do so. The problem of serious violence is one that is something the government is determined to get a grip on, and he rightly points out that my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has a summit on this subject on Monday. He will appreciate that the business of the House is not under the government's control on Monday in terms of statements and so on, but nevertheless I will take away his request and see what can be done. But in terms of his call for the government getting a grip, if I can just say to him, that is exactly what the government is doing. At Spring Statement, the Chancellor announced £100 million so that police and crime commissioners can urgently divert resources to dealing with serious crime. From a more strategic level, we have our Serious Violence Task Force. We have our Offensive Weapons Bill, which will introduce new knife crime prevention orders that will help the police to stop people from carrying knives. We're also extending stop and search powers. We have police forces undertaking coordinated national weeks of action to tackle knife crime. We're launching a consultation on a public health approach to tackling violent crime. And I would say gently to the honourable gentleman, this government is absolutely determined to get a grip, but I will certainly take away his request for a statement following the summit.
The statutory instrument needed to create a new state aid regime after we leave the European Union was due to be debated in committee on the 25th of February. It was withdrawn at short notice. In the 4.5 weeks since the 25th of February, a number of other statutory instruments have been laid and debated, including in the department responsible for state aid. Without a state aid regime that functions properly, businesses and those who work for those businesses that rely on state aid will be in serious difficulty. It will have a profoundly negative impact on our economy. So can the Leader of the House tell me why there has been such a long delay in this SI being considered and when it is likely to be brought back to committee?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that that statutory instrument has in fact been debated and agreed in the other place, and all of the statutory instruments, as I said earlier, have been all of the programme of statutory instruments that we sought to finalise by the date of exit have been completed on time, and any others that need to be made will be carried out in good time for leaving the European Union as necessary. Just to be very clear to the honourable gentleman, if they are not needed for exit day, any statutory instrument, and I'm not commenting on this particular one, but all statutory instruments that need to be in place by exit day will be.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Leader of the House join me in marking today, which is the formation day of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, which celebrates its 13th anniversary as a new regiment in the British Army. Of course, it might be relatively new, but it is also the most senior regiment of line infantry, combining some illustrious names in the Army's history, including the Royal Scots, the King's Own Scottish Borders, the Black Watch, the Royal Highland Fusiliers, the Argyll Southern Highlanders, and the Highlanders, Seaforth, Camerons and Gordons, as well as 2 reserve battalions, the 51st Highland and the 52nd Lowland, the latter of which I am proud to have been a member of. Indeed, I joined the regiment the same year as it was formed in 2006. It was a very formative part of my growing up. So could I have a debate on the huge contribution it's made in the last 13 years of its existence?
Well, I'm delighted to join the honourable gentleman in celebrating the Royal Regiment of Scotland and its great contribution, and all of those regiments that are now forming a part of that. We do owe such a debt of gratitude to all of those people who do so much to keep us safe, but also to support international humanitarian exercises and all of the work they do for our communities.
Anna Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the 14th of January, ahead of the first meaningful vote, the Prime Minister said that the link between the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement means that the commitments of one cannot be banked without the commitments of the other. Does the Leader of the House agree with that?
The Honourable Lady is asking me about a specific statement that the Prime Minister made a few weeks ago. What I can say to her is that any motion that's brought forward will, of course, comply with the law, with the EU Council decision and with the ruling by the Speaker.
Marian Fellows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Next week is Autism Awareness Week. Can we therefore have a debate in government time on the difficulties in accessing employment and apprenticeships for adults with autism spectrum disorders and what this government is doing to help?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises a very important point. It's vital that we do more and everything we can to support those people with autism, many of whom can have extremely rich and fulfilling lives and may need some support to do that. I know that there was a debate on autism quite recently, but the Honourable Lady might like to seek a backbench debate so that this important issue can be discussed further.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last August, Siobhan McLaughlin won her case in the Supreme Court, giving her access to widowed parents' allowance for her children, which she had been denied because she was not married to her late partner of 23 years. The court ruled that the purpose of this allowance is to diminish the financial loss caused to families with children by the death of a partner, and that where an unmarried parent is denied the allowance after the death of a partner is in fact unlawful. Will the Leader of the House make a statement as to why this support is still being denied to unmarried parents after the death of their partner 7 months after this Supreme Court judgment?
The Honourable Lady is raising a very important issue, and if she'd like to write to me after business question, I can take that up directly with the Department on her behalf. But equally, she might prefer to raise it directly with ministers herself.
Yes, point of order, Anna Soubry.
I'm not going to go into the details, but I've shown you an email which I've sent to a senior police officer, and I know the leader is only just getting the opportunity to read, and I'm not going to go into the contents of it. I will say this, Mr Speaker, because I know this will concern you. Yesterday, a member of staff, not from this place, but from the other place, sent me an email to thank me and the honourable member for Cardiff, South and Penarth for raising our concerns about the security of everybody who works in this place. And I can't help myself if there's a catch in my throat. But this is a young woman who works in an office in the other place, who described in a very moving way about how she and other members of staff in this place are being spat at and abused as they come into work because of obviously the political situation. And I know nobody will feel anything other than disgust at what is going on. I'd like to think some people, the majority might be concerned about what's happened to people like me and others, but some think we deserve it. In any event, I know the Leader of the House doesn't, and I thank her for all that she's done. Mr Speaker, I thank you. I thank your deputy, who has, I know, reached out and done everything. But you know what, Mr Speaker? Fine words and many promises mean there is no doubt following a further incident in this House last night, a second incident, the same person from a known far-right group. In short, Mr Speaker, given events tomorrow, no doubt next week, can you just assure us all that everybody, whoever they are, from cleaner to peer, will be kept safe in and out of this place?
To the Right Honourable Lady for her point of order, and to her for showing me a copy of the relevant email, which I have just read at the Chair. I hope I can offer the Right Honourable Lady and all colleagues the assurance sought. I make 2 points. First, as I indicated to the House I would, I have had arranged for me a meeting with me and other senior colleagues, and indeed a variety of colleagues to whom this matter is of concern, with the Parliamentary Security Director and the Chief Superintendent of the Parliamentary Estate. However, I have to acknowledge that that meeting is taking place only next Thursday, so it is some way off, but it was convenient for diary purposes for everybody involved. My second point, however, is that although this does warrant further investigation, and colleagues wouldn't expect me to shoot from the hip, I am concerned by the idea, which has now been put to me not only by the Right Honourable Lady, but by another honourable member last night, that there has been at least one case, and let's not get into an argument about how many, but at least one case of an individual coming onto the parliamentary estate and behaving in a threatening or abusive manner towards members and staff. While, of course, it is a treasured principle that there should be a presumption of public access to the estate for our citizens and for people who want to visit here, having gone through security, it is axiomatic not only that they go through security, but that they pose no threat to anybody here. If there is evidence of a person or persons in relation to whom we cannot feel that sense of security, I believe it must be right for preventive action to be able to be taken. Because if there is a clash between someone's right to visit here and our right, the right of all of us, members, staff, MP staff, to be safe, the latter has to trump the former. I hope that's helpful, but the leader wants to come in, and it's absolutely right that she should. The Leader of the House.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Really just to say, following the exchanges yesterday where you quite rightly said you would convene a meeting, the Director of Security did let my office know this morning, which might be of some reassurance to the Right Honourable Lady, that there is in fact significantly increased security tomorrow for precisely the reason the Right Honourable Lady mentions. And so I do think that our security teams here in Palace are very aware of the concerns. And of course, the second thing I would just remind all honourable members is that the behaviour code that forms a part of the independent complaints procedure applies to everybody, whether they work here or visit here. So if anybody feels that they are being treated in a unhelpful or derogatory way, that actually does invoke the behaviour code that this House signed up to last July.
Well, I think that's a very helpful underlining of the concern and route map to resolution if colleagues are offended or insulted in that way. I haven't made that point, but it's very helpful that the Leader has done. Yes, I will. Point of order, Dr. Julian Lewis.
I apologise for not giving you advance notice of this point of order. Yesterday, I was quite shocked when attending a meeting of colleagues to find at least two, one male, one female, in tears at the prospect of having yet again, having twice taken the difficult decision to vote against a three-line whip, of yet again being put in the position of having to decide whether to do this or not. And I just wonder, at what point will there be some protection, particularly for younger members, not to be put in that sort of situation of being asked to come back again and again and again and again to vote on the same proposition?
Well, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman's point, of which, as he says, I had no advance notice, stands in its own right. I think many people will feel that is a powerful observation. There are a number of reasons for the long-established convention that the House is not asked to decide the same question more than once in the same session. The reason that the Right Honourable Gentleman has invoked was not, from my study of history, part of the original rationale for it, but in my own view, it is a powerful reinforcement of the continuing case for the Convention. I think he's made an extremely important point, and I think it's something on which colleagues at all levels need to reflect. Point of order, Mr. Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The leader, I understand why the leader is not able to give us exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but because I think it hasn't yet been quite decided. But as soon as it has been decided and a motion has been tabled, it would be good if the whole House were able to know what that motion is. I just wonder whether it would be possible to put up on the enunciator, for instance, once the government has tabled its motion, so that people would be able to table amendments to consider whether they think it's appropriate to vote for the motion that we sit tomorrow or vote against it. It'd be good if the government were able to do this by 5 o'clock before we start that debate, which, as I understand, could go on until any hour tonight. And I just wonder whether you'd like to make some kind of provision about manuscript amendments in relation to tomorrow, since we still have no idea what the business tomorrow really is going to be, other than it's broadly to do with Brexit. And the worst of all possible worlds is if we just keep on going round and round and round and round in circles, still riding the same hobby horses.
The honourable gentleman makes a compelling case, and it will have been heard by colleagues for my part insofar as he exhorts me to seek to facilitate manuscript amendments and so on. And I'm inclined to say to the honourable gentleman that I shall always profit by his counsels. I always have done, and I dare say I always will do. Point of order, Mrs. Anne Main.
First point of order from my colleague previously about people being in tears. Can I say that I think all of us here are grown up enough to be able to see that we need to do what we feel is absolutely right when voting. And whipping, as the great Mr. Forth used to say, was optional. And I think it's important that we bear in mind that we cannot have some sensitivities of colleagues over feeling pressurised one way or another to stop us having a full choice. And speaking that the fact that 30 colleagues that I am aware of have changed their mind on the meaningful vote too, I absolutely do not feel we should not have the ability to change our minds for those of us who haven't committed to it yet, to be able to have it back again. And I am feeling rather frustrated, Mr. Speaker, that on the options that we had yesterday, that the two options that I supported would probably not make its way through the beauty contest as I described it. And therefore I reserve the right to wish to have the meaningful vote 3 come back if I'm pairing it off against what I now see as the ugly sisters of the option.
The lady expresses her disappointment with the verdicts of the House in relation to propositions legitimately submitted to it yesterday. The honourable lady did that at an earlier stage in our proceedings, and she has obviously thought it worthwhile to repeat and underline her point. She's perfectly entitled to her view, but it will have to be considered by colleagues alongside that just proffered by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for New Forest East. And conventions exist for a purpose, and if I may very politely say so, and I shall, the validity of a convention or otherwise is not dependent upon a head count at a particular time. The whole point of having a rule is because it is judged to be of value. And the fact that somebody suddenly thinks it isn't convenient doesn't mean that it should simply be discarded. And, I'm not debating the issue with the honourable lady. No, it's not a debate. She's raised a point of order. I've answered it. The Right Honourable Gentleman very courteously raised his, and it was answered. And other colleagues might wish to raise points. I think we always need to have a sense of other. A point of order, Mr. Pete Wishart.
Thank you very much. It follows really on from the point of order made by the honourable member for Rhondda. It's about tomorrow's business. Now, we don't know whether or not this is going to be the meaningful vote, and the Leader of the House quite reasonably told us we will see the motion at 5 o'clock. But it's being heavily briefed to the press, Mr. Speaker, that what's likely to be presented tomorrow is a withdrawal agreement without the political declaration attached. Now, I want to hear from you, from the Chair, Mr. Speaker, whether you think this is acceptable and permissible. And thinking about reference to what's been agreed with the EU councils and the very clear strictures that's included in Article 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act. Will this be an order from the government to bring this forward?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point of order. As to the legality of such a proposition, I would have to look to others to advise. People can take their own People can take their own counsel on this subject, and I certainly would do so. If the honourable gentleman is asking me whether I have seen any such motion, the answer is that I have not. Indeed, I have seen no motion appertaining to tomorrow's business beyond simply that which lies on the order paper, suggesting that we might meet tomorrow. In terms of a substantive motion for tomorrow, I have as yet seen none. I am happy to tell the honourable gentleman, as the leader knows, that I met a couple of very senior colleagues this morning who were exploring possibilities and consulting me, and a conversation was had, as people would think is entirely normal and proper. I haven't since heard from either of those senior honourable or right honourable members, but I might do so during the course of the day. But whatever people are briefing, and briefing is very much a phenomenon of our age. Brief, brief, brief. Create an impression, establish a narrative, try to dictate the course of the events thereby. I know that people do this all the time. I have not been briefed on any such plan, and the honourable gentleman wouldn't expect me to have changed my mind from the position that I enunciated on the 18th of March and which I reiterated on the 25th of March and which was underlined again by me from the chair yesterday. That remains the position so far as the convention is concerned. And as the leader said, in a sense almost as a holding statement in the course of the business statement, we shall have to see what further work is done during the course of the day. Yes, indeed. A point of order, Wayne David, and then Hannah Butter.
On that very point, once it becomes clear what the government intends, once they've submitted their motion, can I ask, would it be possible, sir, for you to make clear to the House what is the significance or otherwise of that motion?
Yes, I mean, I certainly think it's important that we know what we're debating. And at the moment, I'm not cavilling at this. I'm simply saying, as a matter of fact, at the moment, what the leader has announced is that if we sit tomorrow, there will be a debate on a motion relating to the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union, and that of itself could be a perfectly orderly motion, but it isn't specific, and I think it isn't intended to be specific in terms of referring to a particular part of the Act. And so the House would obviously need to know what it is debating and what it isn't debating, and I hope that there will be greater clarity about that, possibly in the course of the day. Well, well, the honourable gentleman for Ronta says from a sedentary position that he wouldn't bet on it, but I mean, I wasn't betting on it. I simply said I would hope. I would hope. And hope springs eternal, as the honourable gentleman rightly observes. Point of order, Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My apologies for not giving you advance notice or being able to be at business questions to raise this, but I have spoken to a number of House staff who have quite reasonable and significant concerns about having holidays cancelled. Now, as members, we absolutely appreciate that we have to come here, you know, despite the somewhat arcane procedures of this place, and lose out on holidays over recess. Although I would ask if you could reiterate, not just for the House, but for journalists and the public watching, that recesses are not holidays, and that in fact we do on occasion as members and as staff take holidays. They are in fact, for most of us, time to go back to our constituents with whom we are getting very limited time to see at present. But leaving that to one side, Mr. Speaker, what can we do as members to make sure the voices of the House staff of this place and indeed the other place are heard, and that if they are having plans cancelled at significant cost, that they can be properly recompensed, because it seems to me from the conversations I've had that is not the case. Members absolutely understand that that's something they have to, in effect, suck up, but I do not believe that the House staff of this place should be messed about and not recompensed for holidays and time with their family that they are losing out of because of this current state of affairs.
As far as staff are concerned, one would expect that they would be fully recompensed. That is very much the working principle here. I can't comment in relation to others, I mean, with no disrespect to them, but as far as journalists are concerned, you know, who are not employees of the House or not working for members, that is a different matter, and the responsibility there would be someone else's. But as far as those here are concerned, the working assumption must be that people are properly recompensed. I understand the anxiety that many people will feel. I hope that there will be clarity about the matter sooner rather than later. And insofar as the Honourable Lady inquires where should people go with their concerns, or what recourse do they have to ensure that those concerns are expressed, I think I would say the trade unions, staff associations are obvious people to go to express concern, and those institutions regularly interact with the House of Commons Commission and indeed, for that matter, the Clerk of the House, who is head of the House Service, not to mention the Director General of the House. So there are avenues, and they're quite well known, and I think the trade unions in this place, are perfectly well aware of how to get their messages across, and it's absolutely right that they are. Point of order, Mr. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you clarify, am I right in interpreting the business of the House motion to mean that it is possible that we could be debating the business of the House motion tonight until any hour prior to the adjournment, and that the government need not introduce tomorrow's business, the business they intend to bring forward tomorrow, until potentially the end of the adjournment tonight, and that therefore it could be at quite a late hour, should they choose to put in a lot of people to speak on the business of the House motion, before we have any concept of what we're debating tomorrow. Is my interpretation correct?
His understanding is correct. That could happen. It is what would be called a worst-case scenario, but I believe it to be so. But I think the leader is cautiously optimistic that that scenario won't transpire, but, I can't rule it out. I can't rule it out. Thank you. Order, if we have exhausted the appetite for now for points of order, perhaps we can proceed with the... and I thank the leader. Sorry? Lunch, absolutely, yeah. Yes. And we proceed now with the presentation of Bill. Sir David Amis.
Thank you. Domestic Properties Minimum Energy Performance number 2 Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 5th of April, sir.
Friday the 5th of April. Thank you. Order. We now come to the debate on beer taxation and pubs. And this is the first of our 2 debates under the auspices of the Backbench Business Committee. Those debates